They found Brienne of Tarth in the courtyard of the Red Keep, diligently polishing the battered steel of her longsword. Sunlight reflected off the ragged scars that marred her cheeks, illuminating her pale blue eyes and the strong planes of her face. She had set aside her helm and gorget, letting the crisp King's Landing air brush across her cropped golden hair. Noise from the city drifted upward, a chorus of distant hawkers, gulls shrieking from the Blackwater Bay, and the ever-present hum of people crowding the streets. It was a sound Brienne still found overwhelming at times, though she had grown somewhat accustomed to King's Landing in the weeks following the war's end. She felt uneasy, and not simply from the bustle of the capital. For the first time in what felt like ages, she was uncertain of the future. The War of the Five Kings had ended in a swirl of betrayals, alliances, and tragedies. In many ways, the capital stood on a precarious edge, no longer governed by the rumors of a chaotic war but not yet steadied by honest peace. Brienne had come here at the behest of those who believed she could serve the realm's sense of justice. She was still suspicious of any scheme that originated in King's Landing, but her sense of duty and her vow to protect the innocent compelled her to remain. Her thoughts lingered on the unlikeliest rumor that Cersei Lannister, stripped of power by the new regime, had demanded a trial by combat to settle charges of treason, murder, and conspiracy. Brienne had heard the rumors well before they were publicly confirmed. Now, all of King's Landing whispered about who might fight in Cersei's name and who might stand against her. Brienne had heard the jests of the city folk that Cersei would call forth some monstrous knight or a faceless champion from the distant corners of Essos. Still others said that no one would fight for her, that her cruelty and cunning had left her friendless. Yet, the Lannister name held far-reaching power. No matter how diminished it might have become, gold could buy both swords and loyalty, at least that was what many believed. But then, not 3 days passed, Brienne learned the truth of it. Cersei had demanded a champion, but none had been found. She had tried to bribe the King's Guard, the Gold Cloaks, mercenaries once in her employ, yet all refused. Rumor also claimed that as her desperation grew, her final plea had been toward the Iron Bank's sellswords. But the Iron Bank had severed any special relationship with the Lannisters in the wake of the war. Thus, without a champion, Cersei would have to fight for herself, a trial by combat with the greatest stakes imaginable, her very life. Brienne had told herself it was none of her affair. Let the Lannisters settle their debts. Let the nobility of King's Landing tear itself apart. She had felt the faint tug of relief that she wouldn't be asked to take up arms for or against Cersei. She was tired of violence. She had killed, bled, watched friends die, and endured uncountable humiliations and tragedies in her short life. Yet, as soon as the High Septon had approached her, quietly requesting that she serve as the faith's champion against Cersei's might, her sense of duty weighed upon her heart like an anchor. "You saved the realm from many ills, Brienne of Tarth," the High Septon had said, his hands folded in his sleeves. "We ask now you defend it again, one last time, against a woman who has wrought such despair and betrayal upon these lands." Brienne did not see it as an honor. She saw it as a burden. And yet, when he asked, she could not refuse. She was not oblivious to the hypocrisy of the faith or how easily it might shift its allegiances. But she knew Cersei's crimes were real. She had seen and heard enough to trust that the accusations were just murder, conspiracies that had led to the deaths of thousands, unspeakable cruelty visited upon innocents. If the letter of the law declared that trial by combat was still Cersei's right, then indeed the realm needed a champion to face her. Many knights had balked at the request. None wanted to risk the cunning or the gold that might back the ex-queen. But Brienne no longer had illusions of living out her days in tranquil peace. Honor demanded she accept. So now, on the morning of the trial, she sat quietly in the Red Keep's courtyard, finishing her final inspection of Oathkeeper. The sword was Valyrian steel, once the cherished heirloom of House Targaryen, then reforged under Tywin Lannister's orders from the Stark Greatsword Ice, and later given by Jaime Lannister to Brienne in an odd, fateful twist. She had vowed to wield it in defense of the innocent, keeping her promise to Jaime that she would fight for the living and uphold her own brand of honorable service. That vow echoed now, though Jaime was gone, his final gift endured. Ser Loras Tyrell had once teased her for how meticulously she checked every rivet, every strap on her armor. But she remembered the day she had failed to do so and nearly died when one of her straps snapped during a practice bout. Brienne's lessons had been taught by heartbreak and near-fatal encounters. She had learned, time and again, never to step into battle half-prepared. She lifted her eyes to the ramparts, half expecting to see the specter of Jaime watching her. But only a pair of gold cloaks patrolled the wall. They paid her no mind. Brienne exhaled slowly. At last, she took up her helm and rose. Despite her size and the thickness of her armor, she moved with a warrior's grace as she crossed the courtyard. Along the path toward the Great September, onlookers were already gathering. The trial would be held in the wide square before the steps of the structure that had replaced the ruins of the old Great September of Baelor, destroyed some years past in an explosion that had claimed hundreds of lives, a deed attributed to none other than Cersei Lannister. Its remains had been cleared and a new sept had been partially rebuilt under the guidance of the faith and the new rulers. It still smelled of fresh mortar and newly cut stone. Today's trial would be among its earliest ceremonies. A great open space on the steps and adjoining courtyard was arranged so that observers could witness the god's judgment as it unfolded. Brienne strode along the cobblestones, accompanied only by the hush of the crowd as they recognized her. She was not a queen, not a highborn lady whose name was spelled in gilded letters across the realm's memory. She was the heir of a small island lord from an unfashionable house, a female knight widely mocked during her youth. Yet, the people gave her space, parted in silent respect. Too many had heard of her deeds. Some whispered that she was the woman who slew the murderous King Stannis. Others insisted she had once bested the Hound. Exaggerations flew from mouth to mouth, but the core truth remained. She was formidable, and she carried herself with the quiet dignity of a knight who had loved and lost and fought in the name of an ideal that few believed existed anymore. She felt their stares pressing upon her. Some were curious, some fearful. Some hid behind stone columns or behind the cloaks of older siblings as if they expected the very sight of a warrior woman with broad shoulders and unwavering stride to be an ill omen. But no one dared throw a jeer or an insult her way. Perhaps the city had softened after so many wars and revolutions. Perhaps they had learned, at last, that knights do not always wear the faces they expect. The air was hot for the time of year, and sweat gathered beneath Brienne's breastplate and arming doublet. She pressed forward, ignoring the heat. A hush had fallen upon the bright marble square in front of the half-finished September. White-robed septons waited along the edges, their hands folded solemnly. The new high septon was draped in layered robes of cream and gold. Though he lacked the gaudy crystal crown of his predecessor, his bearing showed the authority bestowed upon him by the faith. At the foot of the marble stairs stood Cersei, chained at the wrists by slender silver manacles. She wore a gown of black velvet, the color once favored by her father, Tywin Lannister, in times of mourning. But Cersei's garment was frayed at the edges, and the bodice had seen better days. Her golden hair, once so carefully styled, had grown to brush her shoulders in uneven waves. She looked thinner, her cheeks hollowed, yet her eyes still burned with fierce determination. She was like a lioness cornered, ready to lunge at any threat. Next to her stood a stooped old man, her appointed counsel, though the man looked more like a timid clerk than an advocate for a dowager queen. Brienne paused, her heart fluttering with a trace of pity. This once proud queen had lost everything. Family, throne, influence. And yet, even now, as the trial was about to unfold, Cersei's stance retained regal defiance. She might be dressed in tatters, but those emerald eyes dared any to look down upon her. Brienne had no illusions. Cersei was still dangerous. Even unarmed, she possessed a cunning and cruelty that had toppled foes far stronger than many realized. Indeed, a part of Brienne's mind whispered that it was the height of folly to take this woman lightly, especially in a trial by combat. And if by some twist of fate the gods judged in her favor, she might stand reborn in the eyes of the realm. A hush came over the square as a line of gold cloaks ushered the spectators away from the central dais. Brienne stepped onto the round dais, which was flanked by flickering braziers. The day was bright, yet the flames stood as a symbol of truth and the watchful eyes of the gods. No sunshade or dais was set aside for the highborn lords. This was a public trial, open for anyone who dared watch. The High Septon inclined his head in a short bow to Brienne. Then he turned to face Cersei. His voice, trained to carry over the clamor of crowds, rang out, "Cersei of House Lannister, once Queen of the Seven Kingdoms, you stand accused of grievous crimes, murder, high treason, the destruction of the Great September of Baelor, the unholy use of wildfire, and the conspiracy to usurp the rightful powers of the crown. Your champion, if you have one, must stand forth now, or you must face your foe yourself. Do you maintain your demand for trial by combat?" Cersei's eyes flicked across the crowd. She stood without trembling, her chin held high. Brienne noticed the lines of tension in the older woman's posture, as though she braced for some final chance, perhaps scanning the edges of the courtyard in hopes that a cell's word might leap forward, some well-paid miracle to spare her the ordeal. But no one came. "Yes," Cersei said at last, her voice sharp as a snapped twig. "The gods have demanded a trial, and I shall answer them myself if none dares fight for me. Let the realm see that the House of Lannister does not cower." The High Septon solemnly nodded. So be it. Step forward and let the gods judge. With a metallic clatter, one of the gold cloaks unlocked Cersei's shackles. She stood free, rolling her wrists as if feeling the blood rush back into them. Her hands were still slender, but Brienne did not miss the calluses at their base. During her imprisonment, Cersei must have been training. One does not simply pick up a sword to stand in trial by combat. She was likely no expert, but she was also no delicate court flower. She had fought battles of wits her entire life. Now she would fight a physical one. Brienne released a small breath, stepping into the circle. She unsheathed Oathkeeper with a smooth, respectful motion, the Valyrian steel glinting in the sunlight. She held it upright in salute to the High Septon. Her heart drummed a steady rhythm, not of fear, but of solemn focus. She never wanted to relish killing, no matter the foe. Yet she recognized that, for the sake of justice, she might now have to end a life. She would do it cleanly. A fight is a fight, but it need not be brutality without reason. Cersei turned, and one of the gold cloaks handed her a longsword, a standard piece of steel from the garrison's armory. She tested its balance with an awkward flourish, letting the blade whistle through the air. Her expression flickered with something akin to grudging acceptance that this was her only weapon. Brienne did not miss the tension in Cersei's jaw. Here was a woman who had once commanded the greatest knights in the realm, but now stood alone, relying on a borrowed blade. At this moment, for all her crimes, she seemed almost pitiable. In the hush that followed, the High Septon raised his hands. You stand before the gods. You have called for a trial by combat. Let each champion fight to prove their innocence or guilt in the eyes of the seven. May the warrior guide the strong arm, and may the Father grant justice. A faint murmur of approval came from the Septons lining the square. The gold cloaks stepped back, forming a ring to keep the crowd at bay. Brienne and Cersei paced, measuring each other. Brienne fought the impulse to speak. She wanted to say something, perhaps to offer Cersei one last chance to yield, to end this without bloodshed. Yet she did not. She knew Cersei would not yield. Not now, not ever. Instead, Brienne raised Oathkeeper and sank into a defensive stance. She let Cersei move first, certain that the ex-queen, for all her cunning, would not risk letting this drag on. Cersei's only hope was to strike quickly, to seize an advantage if Brienne hesitated or underestimated her. Steel rasped against stone as Cersei lunged, the clang echoing in the hush. Brienne stepped aside, pivoting with the grace that belied her size. The swords locked in a brief ringing clash, and Cersei's blow slid off Brienne's parry, jarring the older woman's arm. Immediately, Brienne counterattacked, a low, swift stroke that forced Cersei to leap back. Despite her inexperience, Cersei avoided a crippling hit. She circled, teeth bared, and lunged again. For the first minute, the onlookers might have hoped that this was some display of skillful swordplay. But truthfully, it was a desperate fight. Cersei had speed and guile, but Brienne had the superior blade, years of rigorous training, and the advantage of her powerful build. When Cersei tried to slip inside Brienne's guard, Oathkeeper darted down with a swift blow that barely missed her thigh. Cersei hissed in pain as the tip of the blade grazed her side, drawing a thin line of blood. She retreated, her eyes flashing with panic. Brienne did not move to chase. She refused to relish another's suffering, but if that single cut sapped some of Cersei's overconfidence, so be it. A few more slow, circling steps. Brienne's breath remained steady. She had endured far worse foes in the war. Her left-handed dagger remained sheathed at her belt, waiting. She saw the sweat on Cersei's brow, the tremor in her arms as the older woman tried to maintain proper stance with the borrowed sword. Across the dais, the crowd seemed to hold its breath. So many times, they had seen the Lannisters triumph with cunning or with the might of gold. Now, they watched a single woman, battered by fate, attempt to cling to that legacy by her own hand. Cersei tried another thrust, an overhead blow that Brienne blocked with a raised arm and Oathkeeper's crossguard. The jolt rang through Brienne's arm, but she met it without flinching. In the next moment, she slammed her steel-plated elbow forward, catching Cersei in the shoulder. It wasn't a full power strike. Brienne hadn't been close enough, but it was enough to send Cersei staggering. Her black velvet gown tore at the sleeve where the armor impacted. Panting, Cersei regrouped, eyes darting. "Murderer!" she spat through clenched teeth. "Traitor! You're everything you pretend not to be." Her voice carried more venom than volume. Perhaps it was an attempt to goad Brienne into a rash strike. But Brienne only frowned. She recalled Jaime's words to her once. Cersei will do or say anything if it can give her an edge. If she lost her composure, she would play right into Cersei's hands. Again, Brienne circled, footsteps echoing on the marble. The crowd shifted, a restless ripple on all sides, but no one spoke. The hush was unnatural, as though the city itself was frozen in anticipation of the outcome. Cersei lunged, her blade hammered into Brienne's side. The older woman had aimed for a vulnerable joint in Brienne's armor, but she missed, striking the thicker plate instead. The blow glanced off, leaving only a fresh scratch. Brienne shoved forward with her shield arm. Though she carried no shield, her bracer was thick enough to deflect with ease, and slammed Cersei's sword aside. Then she lifted Oathkeeper. For a heartbeat, she hesitated, remembering the vow she had once made never to strike down the innocent. But Cersei was no innocent. A smooth downstroke parted the air, forcing Cersei to dodge. She stumbled, lost her footing on the marble, and nearly fell. Only a frantic scramble kept her upright. Brienne could have ended it then, a single stroke while her foe was off balance. But some part of her gave the ex-queen time to rise, perhaps driven by the faintest sense that to end it in such a humiliating manner would dishonor the demands of a trial by combat. She wanted no question left in anyone's mind about the justice of this. Cersei, panting, recognized the mercy for what it was and glared. "Don't you pity me?" she snarled, gripping her sword anew. "I'll kill you where you stand." Brienne's face was steady, showing neither fear nor mercy. She readied Oathkeeper. Around them, the watchers might have begun to murmur, but she paid no mind. She stayed focused on the ex-queen's stance. The trembling arms, the frayed velvet, the half-feral gleam in her green eyes. With a sudden ferocity, Cersei attacked, unleashing a series of desperate slashes. Brienne absorbed them calmly, letting Oathkeeper meet each strike. The clangs reverberated. Finally, when one slash came in too wide, Brienne capitalized. She stepped inside the arc, locking swords for a moment. With her superior strength, she twisted her blade to disarm Cersei. A savage cry escaped Cersei's throat, but it was futile. Steel rang on the marble. Cersei's sword spun away from her grasp, clattering against the dais before skittering down a few steps. Cersei stumbled, her defenses shattered. She crumpled to her knees, chest heaving. Defiance still burned in her eyes, as though refusing to acknowledge defeat. Brienne stood over her, Oathkeeper raised. For several heartbeats, no one moved, no one spoke. The ex-queen was beaten, disarmed. Brienne's final stroke could end her life in an instant. Silence. Then Cersei let out a trembling laugh, half bitter, half hysterical. "Go on then," she hissed. "End it, you self-righteous so." Brienne did not flinch from the insult. Her voice came quietly. "You asked for the gods' judgment. You have it." And with that, she brought the sword down cleanly across Cersei's chest. The blow was swift, angled to pierce the heart, ending Cersei's life with the merciful quickness of a single stroke. The ex-queen gasped, eyes widening. A ragged breath escaped her lips as her body slumped forward, blood darkening the black velvet. And just like that, Cersei Lannister, who had once called herself a Lion of the Rock, a mother of kings, the cunning queen who had set a sept aflame, was no more. A moment of stunned stillness passed. Then the crowd exhaled. No cheers arose. No triumphant bells tolled. Only the hush of finality, a sense of the realm closing one dark chapter and hesitantly wondering what might come next. A subtle wave of relief spread among the small folk pressed at the edges of the square. Some might have expected Brienne to lift her sword in victory, but she simply sheathed Oathkeeper, her gaze lowered. The High Septon stepped forward, raising his arms. "The gods have spoken," he intoned. "Cersei Lannister is found guilty by the hand of her champion's defeat. Let all here witness the final justice. Go in peace, and may the Mother grant mercy to those who show repentance." He cast a glance at Brienne. Though his face was somber, there was gratitude in his eyes. He motioned for a septon to tend to Cersei's body, removing it with quiet ceremony. Many of the watchers drifted away, returning to their everyday concerns. Though momentous, the trial felt anticlimactic after years of terror under Lannister rule. Brienne watched as the lifeless form of Cersei was borne on a stretcher into the new sept, presumably for the rites of the dead. No matter how reviled, the faith would see that at least the forms of tradition were observed. Brienne closed her eyes. A storm of conflicting emotions raged beneath her placid exterior: pity, sadness, relief, and a heaviness she always felt after killing. She had done her duty. She prayed silently to the Seven, asking them to guide her on the path ahead. Then she turned away from the square, following a subtle gesture from the High Septon, who beckoned her to speak with him within the newly finished antechamber of the Great September. She went, her steps strangely heavy. Inside, the antechamber smelled of incense and freshly cut stone. Narrow windows let in rays of sunlight that fell across the polished marble floor, glinting off golden candelabras. Several septas and septons glided about in hushed conversation. The High Septon guided Brienne to a side alcove where a tall candle flickered on a wrought iron stand. He let out a quiet sigh and turned, folding his hands. "You have done the realm a great service," he said gently. "Though it weighs upon you as does all death, I know. But trust in this, your blade was the instrument of justice. The realm is safer now." Brienne nodded, unable to find any comfort in his words. She felt no triumph, only the grim satisfaction that a dangerous, treacherous presence had been removed. "I did what honor required, holiness." "Indeed." He paused, studying her face. "Few knights have your integrity, Brienne of Tarth. I know you do not seek reward, but you are owed a debt of gratitude. If ever you require aid from the faith, we will grant it. Is there anything you wish to ask now?" Brienne hesitated. She thought of her father on Tarth and the hollow feeling of returning there someday with nothing to do but recollect the horrors she had seen. She did not want a castle, or lands, or gold. All she had ever truly wanted was to protect the innocent. Her vow to Lady Catelyn Stark had long guided her path. Perhaps the vow was almost fulfilled. Sansa Stark was safe, Arya Stark was beyond the realm's immediate reach. The war was over. "I only ask that you pray for the souls of those taken by war," she finally said, "both highborn and low, and that the faith endeavors to protect the small folk who have suffered so much." The High Septon inclined his head. "We shall. Go in peace, Sir Brienne. May the Father guide you." With that, he left her to her thoughts. Brienne stood by the flickering candle for a while, letting the murmurs of the sept wash over her. Relief and sadness mingled. At last, she stepped back out into the main hall, heading for the doors that led to the open courtyard. Word of the trial's conclusion had spread quickly, so the crowd had begun to disperse. A few curious onlookers lingered, eyes trailing after her. Some parted respectfully as she passed. She heard no jeers, only uncertain murmurs. "She killed the queen," someone whispered. "She did it to save us," said another. Then the voices faded behind her. Brienne made her way down the broad stone steps. She found Podrick Payne waiting near the bottom, a concerned crease on his brow. Once a squire to Tyrion Lannister, then loaned to Brienne by Ser Jaime, Podrick had become her loyal companion. He looked older now, thinner, a growth of dark stubble on his chin, carrying a short sword at his belt. When his gaze fell on her, he dipped his head in a small bow. "My lady," he caught himself, flushing slightly. Despite Brienne's protests, Podrick had never grown comfortable with what to call her. "Sir Brienne, is it done?" She let out a breath and nodded. "Aye, it's done." He studied her face. "Are you all right?" It was an earnest question. Podrick wasn't the naive boy she had met some years ago. He had walked alongside her through the war, watched her slay men who had threatened them. He had grown from an awkward squire into a capable young man. She wanted to say she was fine, that everything was as it should be. But she settled for honesty. "I'm tired, Podrick. Let's return to our lodging." They walked side by side, crossing the courtyard and stepping onto the narrow street that wound past a row of tall buildings. The midday sun beat down, reflecting off the pale stone. Brienne felt the stares of passers-by more acutely now, as though each glance carried the question, "Is that the woman who killed Cersei Lannister?" She supposed that label would follow her the rest of her days. At least the main thoroughfare was wide enough that she and Podrick could keep a brisk pace. Near the Street of Silk, they spotted a troop of gold cloaks who stepped aside at their approach, showing no hostility, only reserved respect. Whether they had once served the Lannisters or not, times were changing, and it seemed no one would mourn Cersei's passing publicly. A short while later, they turned onto a quieter lane, where a modest inn, the Weary Knight, had offered them rooms. Brienne preferred it to the Red Keep, with its memories of so many intrigues and betrayals. They entered the inn's common room to the smell of spiced wine and stew. A handful of travelers lingered at the tables, speaking in hushed voices. The innkeep, a stout woman with a kindly smile, gave them a nod as they ascended the worn stairs to the upper floor. Their rooms were simple wooden beds, a small fireplace in each, and a wash basin. Brienne's armor creaked as she removed her gauntlets. She was about to doff her breastplate when she noticed Podrick hovering in the doorway. "Podrick?" she asked softly. He swallowed. Sir Brienne, I know you never relish fighting or killing. I wanted to say, I'm proud to have served under you. What you did it was right. I believe that." He looked down at his boots, then gave a small nod of respect and turned to go. His words touched her more than she cared to admit. With a tired smile, she nodded in return, letting him leave. Only then did she remove the rest of her armor, piece by piece, placing it carefully in a corner. She unbuckled her sword belt and set Oathkeeper on the small bedside table. The day's tension slipped from her muscles like water streaming off slate. She washed her face at the basin, letting the cool water ground her. She could not change what had happened, nor could she bring back the dead. The realm's justice had demanded a champion, and she had answered. She sank onto the bed and let her gaze drift across the wooden beams of the ceiling. A swirl of images flickered in her mind. A younger Cersei at court, veiled in gold, whispering poison into King Robert's ear. Then the grim, ragged figure she had just slain, drained of all influence. All the same person, undone by her choices. Some might say it was a lesson about power. Others would speak of it as the Lannisters finally paying their debts. Brienne wanted only to rest. It was near dusk when Brienne woke. The light through the window had softened to an orange glow and she heard the faint hum of city life below. She rose, feeling a pang of hunger. Retrieving a clean tunic and breeches from her saddlebag, she changed out of her sweaty, blood-stained underclothes. She combed her short hair with her fingers, pulled on boots, and made her way downstairs. The common room was busier than before, filled with low conversation and the occasional clink of tankards. She spotted Podrick at a corner table, tucking into a simple meal of roasted vegetables and a chunk of bread. The aroma of hearty stew teased at her nostrils. She crossed over, and as she sat, Podrick shoved a small dish toward her with an eager smile. "Figured you might be hungry. I asked for stew and some fresh bread." Brienne nodded gratefully. "Thank you." She looked around, noticing that a few patrons cast furtive glances in her direction. The gossip must have spread. The woman knight who ended Cersei's life was dining here in a common inn. She tried to ignore their curiosity, busying herself with the stew. It was thick with barley, onions, and bits of salted pork. A comfortable silence settled at the table as they ate. Not long after they began, a short, broad-shouldered man in a merchant's cloak approached, bowing in an awkward, deferential way. "Sir Brienne," he ventured. I beg pardon, but me and my companions heard news of the trial." "Is it true, then?" "Cersei is gone." He was joined by a few others who hovered at a respectful distance, listening. Brienne put down her spoon. She cleared her throat. "Yes," she said softly. "The trial is over." A ripple of murmurs passed among them. One woman pressed a trembling hand to her mouth as though scarcely believing it. She had my daughter thrown in a dungeon years ago, falsely accused of theft." Tears glistened in her eyes. I'm sorry. It's just that so many suffered under her. Thank you." Though Brienne wasn't sure how to respond, she managed a slight nod. The small group lingered a moment, uncertain, then offered subdued thanks and well wishes before returning to their seats. Brienne stared down at her stew. She was not used to receiving gratitude so openly. More often, her deeds were overshadowed by those of lords and kings or dismissed outright. To see these small folk relieved by the knowledge of Cersei's death left her feeling a strange mixture of sorrow and quiet resolution. She truly was a knight who served the people, not just the highborn. She forced a few more spoonfuls of stew down, then sat back, appetite waning. The events of the day had drained her more than any typical battle would. The emotional weight was heavier. Across from her, Podrick finished his meal in silence, seeming to sense her mood. A little while later, they paid the innkeep and stepped out onto the lamplit street. Torches and lanterns glowed against the dusk, illuminating the cobbles with shifting patterns of light and shadow. The breeze carried a faint smell of brine from the bay. Podrick walked at her side in companionable quiet, as though he understood she needed no chatter just then. They wandered to the edge of the city where the Blackwater rush flowed in dark ripples under the night sky. The lights of King's Landing twinkled behind them. Across the water, the silhouette of the city's walls stood like massive sentinels. Brienne leaned on a stone railing and stared at the reflection of the stars in the black current. She found herself thinking of Jaime. The last words they had exchanged echoed in her mind, the battered, bittersweet farewell in which he had pressed Oathkeeper into her hands. She doubted he would ever have wanted this end for Cersei for all their complicated history. But life did not follow tidy arcs of forgiveness. It was messy, cruel, and often heartbreakingly final. Podrick stood a few steps behind, giving her space. She realized that the realm was not done with them yet. The city would still be in turmoil, with lords jockeying for influence and new conspiracies brewing. But for tonight, she had done what she had come to do. She turned back to Podrick. "In the morning, we'll speak with the Crown's officials and see if there's any further need for my service. If they have no tasks for us, we may depart." "Depart for where? Ser Brienne?" Podrick asked softly. She paused, gazing at the black water. "Perhaps Tarth. My father is aging and I've been gone too long. I might just rest there. And if the realm needs me again, they'll know where to find me." Podrick nodded. He didn't question her. "Then I'll ready the horses," he said. "Once we know for sure we're free to go. Though I suspect they'll want to reward you somehow." Brienne shook her head. "I want no reward. Let them build a better realm. That'll be enough." A sadness crept into her voice. She wasn't sure if she entirely believed in the realm's capacity for betterment, but it was an ideal she clung to nonetheless. They lingered a while longer, gazing at the dark currents. When Brienne finally turned away, she felt a measure of calm. It was time to rest. The city's winding streets led them back to the inn. Lantern light flickered across the door's weathered frame. Brienne ascended to her room without a word, exhaustion pressing down on her. She unbuckled her sword belt, set Oathkeeper aside, and eased onto the bed. Sleep claimed her almost immediately, a tumble into the welcome oblivion of dreamless rest. Morning came all too soon. Gray light filtered through the small window, accompanied by the cawing of gulls outside. Brienne stirred, blinked the sleep from her eyes, and rose. After a moment spent recentering herself, remembering the events of the previous day, she dressed in her simpler tunic and breeches, then carefully donned portions of her armor. She wanted to show respect to whoever the city's new officials might be. Podrick was already waiting downstairs, finishing a mug of watered wine. They shared a brisk nod, and then they walked out into the early bustle of King's Landing. The thoroughfares thrummed with the usual chaos. Carts laden with produce, fishmongers crying out their wares, children weaving between patrons. But an undercurrent of tension remained. The city had lived in fear of Lannister reprisals for so long that it was uncertain how to proceed now that Cersei was gone. Brienne imagined that, with time, normalcy might return. They made their way to the Red Keep, ascending the steep approach guarded by gold cloaks in shining half-plate. The men recognized Brienne and waved her through with only a token question. Within, the keep's courtyard gleamed under a brightening sky. It was an old routine for Brienne. Walk the stately corridors, pass under stone archways, keep her steps firm despite the anxious hush that always lingered here. Once, these halls had been heavy with Tywin Lannister's iron will, with Joffrey's cruelty, with Tommen's confused innocence, and with all the cunning that Cersei had brought to the seat of power. Now, what did they hold? A steward guided them to an antechamber near the throne room. There, a cluster of officials and courtiers whispered among themselves, many wearing the sigils of various houses, Tyrell, Martell, Tully, even some lesser houses from the Westerlands and the Vale. Conversations halted when Brienne appeared. She recognized a few faces among them, lords and ladies who had survived the war. Some offered small smiles, others looked uncertain. After a moment, a middle-aged woman in a rich green dress stepped forward. Brienne recalled her name, Lady Ellery Tarly, a distant cousin to House Tarly, newly elevated to a position of influence for her loyalty to the crown in the final campaigns. "Ser Brienne," she said with measured politeness, "thank you for coming. The crown wishes to express gratitude for your service in the matter of Cersei Lannister's trial." Brienne inclined her head, her voice quiet. "I did only what was required by my vows." Lady Ellery's lips curved in a small, courteous smile. "Nevertheless, the crown owes you. His Grace has asked that we extend an offer, a place on the new King's Guard." Your reputation and skill precede you, and it would do the realm good to have a knight of unwavering honor in that office. Will you accept? Brienne froze. She had not anticipated a direct offer of this magnitude. Membership in the Kingsguard meant a lifetime vow, a renunciation of claims to lands or titles, and absolute dedication to protecting the king, whoever that might be, in these tumultuous times. In some ways, it was the pinnacle of knighthood and honor beyond measure. But she remembered all too well how the office had been tarnished by the likes of Meryn Trant and others who pledged loyalty to vile kings. She also remembered her father's face, how he longed for her to come home. Could she truly refuse such an offer if it was for the good of the realm? She found her words carefully. I am humbled by the king's generosity. Truly, but I confess I am weary, my lady, from war and from loss. I am not certain I can serve effectively in the city, bound to the palace for years to come. Lady Ellery nodded as though expecting such a response. I understand. War has weighed heavily upon us all. Still, the offer remains. Should you find it in your heart to accept, you would be most welcome. In the meantime, the king has authorized a more immediate reward. A sum of gold or lands, whichever you desire. Brienne shook her head gently. I need no gold. My father has enough for us to live on Tarth. I only ask that the crown strengthen the realm's defenses against those who would bring more suffering, and that it find ways to help the people rebuild. Lady Ellery's expression softened. You are every bit as honorable as they say. Very well. The crown will do its utmost to restore the realm, though it will be a long task. If ever you have need of resources to protect the innocent or uphold the king's peace, we will grant you what we can. I thank you for that, Brienne replied. A scribe appeared, stepping forward to note details and formalize the conversation. Brienne felt somewhat embarrassed by the attention, but the scribe dutifully recorded that Ser Brienne of Tarth refused personal reward, requesting only relief for the people and ongoing stability for the realm. Ser Brienne, said Lady Ellery gently, there is one matter yet to address, the final disposition of the remains of Cersei Lannister. She is to be buried in the royal crypts, per her family's wishes, but you are not obligated to attend. Brienne's lips parted in surprise. She had not considered the question of attending Cersei's burial. I see, she said softly. Then it is arranged? Lady Ellery nodded. This evening at sunset, in the crypt beneath the Red Keep. We expect few attendees, but it was deemed appropriate that she lie with her children. For a moment, conflicting emotions again churned in Brienne's chest. She had never cared for Cersei. The woman had maligned and humiliated her many times. Yet she recalled how fiercely Cersei had loved her children. Perhaps, in death, being reunited with them was some solace, though it would not erase her crimes. Thank you for letting me know, Brienne said after a moment. I will decide if I should attend. With that, her business in the antechamber seemed concluded. Lady Ellery gave a slight curtsy and turned back to her circle of courtiers, leaving Brienne standing with Podrick by her side. The large double doors leading to the throne room stood shut for the time being, guarded by a pair of solemn-faced knights. Brienne exchanged a glance with Podrick and motioned for them to depart. The scribe bowed them out politely. They made their way back through the corridors. The airy windows overlooking the courtyard were filled with bright sunlight now. Podrick remained silent until they were nearly outside. Finally, he spoke. Are you going to her funeral, Ser Brienne? Brienne frowned, trying to gather her thoughts. I do not know. I have no wish to see her body again, yet something in me feels I should witness it. Perhaps for Jaime's sake. Podrick nodded. They walked in silence for a few beats, the stone floors echoing beneath their boots. As you wish, he said quietly. Whatever you decide, I'll be there if you need me. They stepped back into the courtyard, which bustled with servants carrying bundles of linens, crates of supplies, and sacks of grain for the fortress. War was over, but the city still had to be fed and the keep still demanded provisions. Brienne looked around at the activity, conscious of how small an event this day's funeral would be in the greater tapestry of rebuilding. She decided not to linger in the keep. Let's walk a bit, she said to Podrick, and they made their way out into the city, wandering aimlessly through the markets as if to remind themselves of normal life amid the aftermath of the trial. Sunset came, painting the sky in hues of orange and violet over the Red Keep's battlements. Brienne found herself once again within the fortress, following the directions of a quiet steward down a winding staircase that led to the crypt. She had not planned on attending initially, but in the late afternoon she had realized she felt a strange pull to see this final moment. Perhaps it was, in a way, to pay respects to what Jaime had once loved. Perhaps to close the door on any lingering bitterness. She did not fully understand it, but she knew she must go. Podrick accompanied her to the entrance. A pair of guards nodded in solemn recognition. There within, one whispered, "Just the Septon and a few watchers." Brienne made her way down the torchlit corridor, the walls of carved stone cool and damp. At the far end, a small chamber opened onto a row of crypt vaults set behind metal gates. The golden lion sigil of House Lannister was etched into a plaque near the entrance, marking these tombs as belonging to the Lannister royals. The chamber was lit by a few flickering torches and a single lantern set on a stone shelf. A slender septon in plain robes stood over a casket of polished wood shaped with gold fastenings. Atop it lay a black cloth. There were two other figures present, one an older woman in fine black attire, her face drawn with sorrow, some distant cousin of House Lannister, perhaps. The other was a young acolyte assisting the septon with the prayers. The hush was almost tangible. Brienne stepped forward quietly. She did not kneel. Instead, she stood at the foot of the casket, her gaze fixed on the stilled form within. Cersei's face looked pale and wax-like, her golden hair brushed neatly around her shoulders. Despite the linen and finery arranged for the funeral, there was no disguising the finality of death. She did not look peaceful exactly, her features seemed frozen in an expression of faint disdain. Yet the harsh lines of life's worries had faded. This was no longer the cunning queen who had once manipulated the realm. This was only a body, soon to be entombed beside her children. A heaviness settled in Brienne's chest. She whispered a silent goodbye, not to Cersei but to the conflict that had scarred so many. In her mind, she thought of Jaime's last words to her. He had told her once that he wanted to die in the arms of the woman he loved. She wondered if, in the end, he had. Perhaps the details no longer mattered. Both Lannister twins were gone. The realm had moved on. The Septon's voice came softly, reciting final prayers for the departed. May the mother's mercy guide her soul, and may the warrior judge her valor. May the father judge her deeds in fairness, and may the crone light her darkened path. Brienne let the words pass over her without fully absorbing them. She heard the final rites concluded, and the acolyte moved to seal the casket. Metal hinges squeaked, and the black cloth was folded over. Two guards appeared and carefully lifted the casket, carrying it into the crypt. Through the metal gate, Brienne could see rows of stone sarcophagi. Some bore the carved effigies of Tommen and Myrcella. She could not see Joffrey's from her angle, but she assumed it was there. The casket was placed in the final space, and the gate was locked. And so, Cersei Lannister's story ended with scarcely an audience, an ignoble funeral for a once-feared queen. The older woman in black sniffled quietly and left, escorted by the acolyte. The Septon lingered only a moment, then dipped his head in silent farewell to Brienne, leaving her alone in the crypt's antechamber. Brienne stood there, gazing through the gate. Perhaps she expected some stirring emotion, but all she felt was a numb acceptance. She realized this was how it must be. Too many had died because of hatred and vengeance. She had avenged Renly Baratheon. In a sense, Cersei had had a hand in the War of the Five Kings that had claimed Renly's life, even if not directly at that moment. But justice was fickle, complicated. Brienne had no illusions that this was a perfect resolution. It was simply the end. She turned away, footsteps echoing on cold stone as she ascended the staircase. Night had fully settled over King's Landing. She walked out into the courtyard where the torches along the walls flickered in the breeze. Podrick was waiting at the top of the steps, concern etched on his face. Brienne inclined her head, wordless. Together, they walked out from the Red Keep under the watchful eyes of the guards. Once they were in the open air of the city again, Podrick ventured a quiet question. "Are you, well, Sir Brienne?" She closed her eyes briefly, inhaling the sea-kissed night breeze. "I am all right, Podrick. Tired. Let's return to the inn." He accepted that, and they made the familiar trek through the lamplit streets. For the first time since she had set foot in King's Landing weeks ago, Brienne sensed a kind of stillness in her heart. She had done her duty. Cersei was gone. The realm, for better or worse, would go on. And she might finally put down her sword for a while. Sleep came a bit easier that night. No triumphant dreams, no nightmares, just a quiet rest. They left King's Landing at dawn a few days later. Brienne felt no urge to linger, and no calls had come from the crown demanding her presence. The horizon stretched wide as they rode through the city gates. A mild wind stirred the dust of the well-traveled roads. She guided her mare onto the Rose Road, then turned southeast, heading for the Stormlands. Podrick rode at her side, packhorse in tow. For the first few days of travel, they passed caravans hauling goods. Soldiers patrolled at intervals, wearing the Stag of Baratheon and the Dire Wolf of Stark, tokens of the alliance that had stabilized the realm after so much bloodshed. The war was over, though tension would linger and new troubles might arise. Brienne gazed upon these men with mild relief. At least the roads were safer now than they had been during the height of the conflicts. Villagers were rebuilding, crops were being sown, and no fresh armies marched to burned fields. Riding for hours on end let her mind wander. She thought about Tarth, her father, the memory of that shimmering sapphire island she had always called home. Sometimes she felt guilt for being away so long, for chasing after honor. But she reminded herself that her father had known her heart and she suspected he would understand why she had had to do all she'd done. Podrick broke her reverie one afternoon with a question. "Sir Brienne, do you think peace will last?" She glanced at him, the lines of her face softening in a faint, bittersweet smile. "I hope so," she said, "but I know the realm. There will always be those who hunger for power. I can only pray that the lords in charge have learned from so much bloodshed. And if not, then perhaps we'll be called upon again." He nodded, gaze drifting across a field where farmers worked. "I want to learn from you if that time comes again. I want to become a knight like you." Brienne felt a pang of humility. She was not sure she was a proper example. Yet, seeing Podrick's earnestness, she recalled how much he'd grown under her guidance. "When we reach Tarth, we'll see about continuing your training in earnest. You've come a long way, Podrick." His cheeks reddened slightly, but he looked pleased. They rode on, the horses' hooves clopping on the packed earth. The nights they camped under the stars, Brienne found herself occasionally dreaming of the old days, of a kindly Marjorie Tyrell dancing with her at a feast, or a younger Renly smiling at her during a mock tournament. Echoes of a past that no longer existed. She awoke each morning with a mixture of sadness and gratitude that she had at least known them, and also that she was still alive to carry their memories. She prayed that her skill with the sword had, in some small measure, bettered the world. One late afternoon, they stopped by a clear stream to water the horses. The sun's rays filtered through a canopy of light green leaves, and the gentle babble of water soothed Brienne's spirit. As Podrick filled the waterskins, she took a moment to kneel on the stream bank and splash water on her face. The reflection staring back at her still seemed so foreign. The tall, broad-shouldered woman with cropped golden hair, a scar on her cheek, eyes that had seen too much. But beneath the scars, she recognized the vestiges of that naive girl who once believed in songs of true knights. She realized that, in her own way, she had become the knight she had always wished to follow. She rose, wiping her face, and turned to Podrick, who waited patiently with the horses. "Let's push on a bit further," she said. "We can find a proper inn before dark." He nodded. Together, they rode onward, crossing meadows sprinkled with wildflowers. A sign that spring had arrived. The realm was moving into a new season, both literally and figuratively. In the distance, the Stormland's rolling hills beckoned, eventually leading to the sea, and beyond that, the Sapphire Isle she called home. They passed a few more villages, some with newly raised wooden palisades or partially reconstructed holdfasts. The inhabitants regarded the travelers warily at first, but most relaxed when they saw no large banners or soldiers among them. Farmers sold fresh eggs, cheese, and bread from roadside stalls. A sense of cautious hope permeated the air. Finally, in the twilight of a mild spring day, they reached a small town built around the remnants of an old fortress. The wooden sign swinging by the roadside indicated a modest inn. Weary from travel, Brienne and Podrick decided to stay the night. The inn, the Silver Serpent, proved cozy enough. The common room was warm, if dimly lit. Podrick found them seats near a corner hearth, ordering mulled wine and a simple meal of barley porridge, salted fish, and dried fruit. The inn's walls were decorated with mismatched tapestries, likely gathered from traders. A few local folk occupied the other tables: merchants, a couple of traveling laborers, and a pair of aging soldiers. Brienne stifled a groan as she sank onto the wooden bench, rolling her shoulders to ease the stiffness. Days of riding had taken a toll. She missed the comfort of Tartha's gently lapping shoreline and the open, salty air. Soon, she told herself, "We'll be there soon." As they waited for their food, a bard in the corner plucked at a lute. His tune was soft, a ballad about the dance of the dragons, if Brienne's memory served her. She watched him, noting the subtle changes he made to the known story, perhaps to suit the local audience. After a few verses, he paused, scanning the patrons, and his gaze drifted to Brienne. She met his eyes only briefly, but that was all it took for recognition to spark in his face. He stood, lute in hand, and approached with the caution of a man who isn't sure if he'll be welcomed. "Begging your pardon," he said, bowing theatrically. "But your presence is known to me, Ser Brienne of Tarth. Word travels swiftly these days, especially after the happenings in King's Landing." Brienne felt her cheeks warm, though she did not look away. "Good evening," she managed. She realized he must have heard about Cersei's trial, about how Brienne served as the Faith's champion. She prepared herself for a barrage of questions or praise. The bard smiled kindly. "No need for alarm, my lady. I merely wish to offer a humble tribute, a new verse to my repertoire, in honor of your deeds. May I sing it for you?" Brienne stiffened. She loathed the idea of being the subject of a song. It reminded her uncomfortably of all the mocking tunes that had once circulated about the Brienne the Beauty. But Podrick was looking at her with boyish excitement, and the bard seemed genuine. She exhaled. "If you must," she said quietly. The bard nodded eagerly, strumming a tentative chord on his lute. He began to sing in a soft, clear voice. In the realm of swords and shattered thrones, a maiden knight stood tall. Her honor shone where hope was scarce, a shield for great and small. She crossed the fields of bitter war, oath-keeper in her hand. She faced the golden lioness, for justice in the land. No gold nor praise did she demand, no lord to guide her blade. She fought for truth and mercy's grace, and debts of blood were paid. Now rest, brave knight. Your vow is kept. Your sword has seen us through. When darkness threatened all the realm, your courage proved it true." His voice trailed off on the final chord, leaving the inn momentarily hushed. The travelers and townsfolk who had been listening began to clap. Brienne, unsettled by the attention, felt a swell of conflicting emotions. Embarrassment, humility, perhaps a flicker of gratitude. The words of the ballad were simplistic, but they carried genuine respect. And in a realm that had long scorned her, it was a rare moment. "Thank you," she said, forcing her voice not to tremble. The bard bowed low once more, evidently pleased, and returned to his corner to resume quieter tunes. Podrick beamed at her. "It was a fine song," he whispered. Brienne managed a small smile. "Yes, it was," she admitted, and in her heart, she hoped that if stories about her were to spread, at least they might carry the message that honor and compassion still lived in some corners of the world. Their food came, and they ate in relative peace, the hum of conversation gradually returning to the inn. Afterward, Brienne retired to a cramped but clean room on the second floor, while Podrick took the smaller room across the hall. The night was uneventful, the straw-filled mattress a welcome respite from the road. By the third week of travel, they were deep in the Stormlands. The sky was often overcast, and rolling thunder occasionally echoed in the distance. The terrain grew wilder with rugged hills and thick forests. Brienne knew these lands well enough, having traveled them before, albeit not as often as the Crownlands. Occasionally, they would pass a ruined tower or scorched farmland, remnants of the war. Local folk worked to rebuild, gathering timber, thatching roofs, and clearing rubble. Brienne's presence often surprised them, especially when they recognized her as a tall, broad-shouldered woman with a sword at her hip. But hostility was rare. Times were calmer now, and though some men might have chortled in the old days, most now only offered weary nods. War had taught them not to judge a warrior by appearance alone. One late afternoon, as they rode around the base of a steep hill, they encountered a minor lord's retinue heading north. The lord introduced himself as Lord Bywater, a recently appointed caretaker of a portion of Storm's End's territory. He recognized Brienne at once, her face and name apparently known from the rumors out of King's Landing. He bowed as though greeting a far more exalted personage. "Ser Brienne, your deeds are well known," he said. "If I may, I'd ask if you've seen any trouble on the roads in recent days? Bandits, broken men, anything of that sort?" Brienne thought back, shaking her head. "No, my lord. The roads have been fairly clear." He nodded, relieved. "We've heard rumors of outlaws, stragglers from the war. I'm pleased if that's not the case. The small folk have seen enough hardship." Then he paused as though struggling to ask something. Tell me, do you think the realm will hold? Is the Lannister threat truly finished? He asked the question in earnest, looking to her as though she were some authority on the realm's future. She took a breath. Cersei Lannister is dead. The Lannisters who remain are no threat by themselves, not in the old sense. I believe the crown is stable. But the realm is large, my lord, and there will always be those who seek advantage. He accepted her words somberly. Well, I'll do my part to keep the peace. Safe travels to you, Sir Brienne. With that, he and his retinue continued northward and Brienne pressed on toward Tarth. The days passed in a blur of changing skies and winding roads. Eventually, from a high ridge, they caught sight of the sea, a wide, gray expanse under a brooding sky. Brienne's heart lifted. This coastline was familiar to her, the stormlands giving way to the waters that separated the mainland from Tarth. Soon enough, they would find a boat or ferry to cross the straits. She recalled the last time she had glimpsed Tarth's shores before the War of the Five Kings had truly exploded. She had been naive, her heart filled with illusions of chivalry. Life had hardened her, tempered her like steel. But she was not broken. She still believed in an ideal of honor. That evening, they reached the small harbor town from which ferries departed to Tarth. White gulls wheeled overhead, crying out against the salty wind. A handful of trading cogs were docked, their sails furled, while fishermen went about their tasks on the docks. Brienne felt a surge of unexpected emotion. She was close to home, truly home, for the first time in so long. She found an inn near the harbor, the Sapphire Sailor, and arranged for passage on a morning ferry. The inn was comfortable enough with simple wooden decor and windows that overlooked the sea. When Brienne stood by one of those windows, the briny breeze rustled her hair, carrying her memories back to childhood. Tarth was called the Sapphire Isle for the color of its waters. She had always loved how the sun would illuminate the waves, turning them a brilliant blue-green, as though the entire sea were made of gemstones. As the night deepened, Brienne let the day's fatigue settle over her. Podrick was already asleep in his room, eager for the morrow's journey. Brienne slid open the window, letting the sound of waves lull her mind. She thought of her father, of the possibility of setting aside her sword for a while, of walking Tarth's shores at sunrise. She thought of all she had done, saving Sansa Stark, fulfilling her vow, slaying Stannis, and now ending Cersei's threat. It was enough to fill a lifetime. Perhaps she might finally allow herself a measure of peace. In the distance, faint lightning flickered in the clouds. A storm was brewing somewhere far out to sea. Brienne watched it with a pensive gaze, recalling how storms had once terrified her when she was a girl, but she had learned to find awe in their power. She held no illusions that life from now on would be calm, but she would do her best to face every squall with courage and dignity. After a while, she shut the window and undressed, crawling into the inn's modest bed. Sleep came gently. The following morning dawned with a fresh wind sweeping over the harbor. The ferry captain, a swarthy man with a braided beard, greeted Brienne with respect after learning she was the Lord Selwyn Ta, RTH's daughter. Soon, she and Podrick had their horses secured aboard the vessel along with a few other travelers. The ferry was no grand ship, but it was sturdy enough with a single mast and a wide deck for cargo. Men hauled crates of goods aboard, cursing good-naturedly at the gulls that swooped overhead, hoping for scraps. Brienne stood at the prow as they cast off. The sea breeze was bracing, carrying the scent of salt and seaweed. She closed her eyes for a moment, relishing the familiarity. The crossing would take the better part of the day, but she was in no hurry. Her journey was nearly at an end. Podrick joined her at the railing. "I've never been to Tarth," he remarked. "Is it truly as blue as they say?" She smiled, a genuine warmth lighting her eyes. "Sometimes, yes. Wait until the sun is higher, you'll see." And indeed, as morning advanced, the light broke through the clouds, illuminating the waters with a brilliant azure hue. The small waves sparkled and the ferry cut through them with a steady, gentle rocking motion. Podrick's face lit up. "It's beautiful, Sir Brienne." She couldn't deny the surge of pride. For all the scorn she had endured in courtly circles, Tarth was a place of dazzling natural wonder, a land of sapphire waters and lush green hills. She hoped Podrick would come to love it as she did. They spent the day on the deck, speaking little, content to watch the changing sea. A few dolphins appeared briefly off the bow, leaping alongside. Podrick laughed, pointing them out, and even Brienne felt a small thrill at the sight. It was an omen of good fortune, so sailors often said. By late afternoon, the outline of Tarth's cliffs and beaches rose clearly in the distance. Brienne recognized the shape of the coastline, the rocky headlands flanking a sheltered cove. A fortress, Evenfall Hall, stood proudly on a rise overlooking the sea. Her father's seat. She had grown up within those walls, learning to ride and sword fight in its courtyard, dancing awkwardly at feasts. A tender ache filled her chest. They reached the small harbor below Evenfall Hall near sunset. The ferry pulled into the dock, where a few men in House Tartha's livery awaited, having been alerted by a runner from the ship's captain that Lord Selwyn's daughter was aboard. The men bowed as Brienne and Podrick led their horses down the gangplank. "Welcome home, my lady, Sir Brienne," said one, a grizzled guard with silver in his beard. "Your father will be overjoyed." She nodded, finding her voice choked by emotion. "Thank you. How is he?" The guard offered a reassuring smile. "He's well, my lady, though he's slowed some with the years. But his mind is as sharp as ever. Come, we'll escort you to the hall." And so Brienne rode the familiar path from the harbor to the castle gates, the final stretch of her long journey. Evenfall Hall's high walls and weathered battlements stood silhouetted against the orange sky, the banner of House Tarth. Quartered pink and yellow with the sun's and moon's sigil fluttered in the wind. Memories flooded back with every step of her horse. The orchard where she once hid to avoid dancing lessons. The watchtower she had climbed as a girl, dreaming of being a knight. The courtyard where she had bested her first sparring partner. As they entered the castle yard, a small cluster of servants and guards hurried to greet them. Word had already spread, Lady Brienne returned at last. And then, through the door of the main keep, Lord Selwyn Tarth emerged, a cane in his right hand. He looked older, his once blonde hair gone nearly white, and though he still stood with dignity, his left leg seemed stiff. Yet his face lit with joy upon seeing her. "Brienne," he called, voice thick with emotion. She dismounted, and he moved forward, pulling her into a swift, warm embrace. For a moment, all the weight of her trials melted. She was simply a daughter returning home. "Father," she whispered, swallowing the lump in her throat. "I'm sorry it took so long." He shook his head, stepping back to regard her, his eyes brimming with pride and relief. "No apologies, my child. The realm needed you, and I see it has shaped you into a true knight." She flushed, glancing down. "I've done what I could." Lord Selwyn's gaze shifted to Podrick, who stood behind Brienne, trying not to look awed by the scene. "And who is this young man?" Brienne laid a hand on Podrick's shoulder. "This is Podrick Payne, my squire and companion. He's traveled with me through many dangers." Podrick bowed stiffly. "My lord, an honor to meet you." Lord Selwyn smiled kindly. "Any friend and ally of my daughter is welcome. You'll find no shortage of hospitality here, lad." And with that, they were ushered inside. Servants took their horses and belongings. The great hall of Evenfall was aglow with torches, and though it was smaller than the halls of King's Landing or Highgarden, it felt more welcoming to Brienne than any grand palace ever had. The smell of roasted meat and fresh bread drifted from the kitchens. Lord Selwyn led them to the high table, where Brienne's old nurse, now aging herself, fussed over them, exclaiming how tall Brienne still was and how she needed a decent meal. For a time, they ate and talked. Brienne offered only the broad strokes of her adventures, not wishing to overshadow the simple pleasure of being home with grim details. Lord Selwyn listened attentively, marveling at the mention of meeting the Stark girls, traveling with Jaime Lannister, and finally, the trial by combat that ended Cersei's life. He did not judge her or question her choice. He only placed a hand over hers and said, "You've done your duty, and I am proud." The evening passed in a blur of warmth and familiarity. Brienne felt a sense of peace creeping over her heart. When at last she retired to her old chambers, dusted and prepared for her return, she stood for a moment, letting the quiet envelop her. She set Oathkeeper on a stand near the bed, recalling how she once had no sword of her own, only a wooden practice blade. She traced a finger along the Valyrian steel hilt. The sword was still a symbol of her vows, but for now she might rest. Outside, the night sky over Tartha's Sea glistened with stars. Brienne closed her eyes and whispered a simple prayer to the Seven, not for war or justice this time, but for the realm's peace. Then she undressed, lay down, and let the gentle murmur of the sea lull her to sleep in the land she called home. In the days that followed, she rose early to walk the castle grounds with Podrick, reintroducing herself to the keep's staff and reacquainting herself with the details of running a small estate. They took a short ride to the shoreline, letting their horses gallop along the sandy beach while the surf crashed nearby. Brienne felt a stirring of gratitude for life's simpler pleasures, a sunrise over calm waters, the crisp scent of salt in the air, the soothing rustle of wind in the palm trees. Lord Selwyn was content to have her home. He asked her occasionally about King's Landing affairs, how stable the crown was, whether Tarth should prepare for more conflict. But she assured him that for now calm reigned. The topic of her future came up only once after supper on a mild evening. She and her father sat by a balcony that overlooked the sea, sipping watered wine. He studied her face. "Will you stay?" he asked quietly. "I know you have wanderer's blood, my daughter, but Tarth is your home. There's always a place for you here." Brienne smiled faintly, gazing at the rolling waves in the moonlight. "I want to stay," she said. "At least for a while. Perhaps one day the realm will call me back, or I might be needed. But until then, I'd like to be here with you, seeing to our people's welfare." Lord Selwyn nodded, relief shining in his eyes. "Then it's settled. Rest as long as you wish. You've earned it." And so it was. In time, word spread across Tarth that Lady Brienne had returned, the knight who had slain Cersei Lannister in a trial by combat and helped end the wars on the mainland. Some whispered legends about her prowess. Others recalled her as the shy, awkward girl who once lived within these walls. Regardless, all seemed to welcome her presence, hopeful that her sense of justice and courage would benefit the island's governance. Slowly, Brienne found herself settling into a new rhythm of life. She rose early, trained with Podrick in the courtyard, teaching him the finer points of swordsmanship and knightly conduct. She accompanied her father on tours of the island's villages, ensuring roads were maintained and disputes settled. She visited the orchard where she had once sought refuge, finding the trees grown older and stronger, their blossoms fragrant in the Tarth sunshine. She accepted the thanks of the small folk with humility, always remembering that it was their well-being that knights were sworn to protect. She would never forget the weight of her duty nor the countless lives lost in the wars. But here, in Tarth's gentle light, she began to heal. Each day, she felt a fraction lighter, less burdened by the ghosts of battle. She would likely always carry the memory of Cersei's final moments, the ring of steel echoing in that courtyard, the hush of the crowd, and the single, decisive stroke that ended the war's last lioness. Yet she prayed that memory might serve as a reminder of what unchecked ambition and cruelty could bring destruction. Sometimes she walked the beach alone, letting the surf wash around her armored greaves. She would look down at Oathkeeper's reflection in the water as though remembering Jaime Lannister and the vow she had made at his behest to protect the innocent, to serve the living. It was a vow she would keep until her final day. The realm might not sing her praises in grand songs, though a few bards might try, but she needed no grand acclaim. Her honor was enough. And so, on a bright day with seabirds circling overhead, Brienne of Tarth walked along the sand, the waves lapping at her feet. She breathed in the salty wind and smiled softly, thinking of the future. Should darkness ever rise again in the Seven Kingdoms, should new tyrants threaten the peace, she would ride forth without hesitation. But until that day, she would live here, in the land of sapphire waters and quiet courage. Cersei Lannister's shadow was gone, defeated not just by Brienne's sword, but by the realm's yearning for justice and the slow, stubborn resilience of good people everywhere. The lioness had fallen, and the maiden knight endured. Far out at sea, sunlight dazzled on the waves like a scattering of diamonds. Brienne lifted her gaze to the horizon, where the heavens kissed the water. She took another breath, let the sea wind caress her scarred cheeks, and whispered a silent promise that she would remain steadfast in the face of whatever came next. She had once believed in the stories of chivalry. Now, she was one of those stories, a living testament that the gods could indeed grant justice if only good men and women dared to stand against cruelty. And so ends the tale of Cersei's last stand and begins the next chapter for the knight who overcame mockery, heartbreak, and war to become the champion of the realm's better nature. It continues immediately after Brienne has returned to Tarth and begun to settle into her new role, healing from the scars of war. This portion is written without chapter breaks or subtitles as requested and with close attention to detail. It expands upon Brienne's experiences at home, the possible stirrings of new threats, and her own personal reflections. The story remains a work of fan fiction and is not canon. The text below provides an additional 6,500 words or more of narrative extension, picking up seamlessly from the point where the previous installment ended, in which Brienne stands upon the shores of Tarth, considering her future. Brienne rose early the next morning, awakened by the cry of gulls that had perched along the battlements of Evenfall Hall. Gentle light slanted through the narrow windows of her old bedchamber, illuminating the simple wooden furniture and the tapestry depicting Tarth's sapphire waters. For a moment, she allowed herself the luxury of lying still, savoring the hush of dawn. Then she heard a distant rumble of thunder, common enough in these lands, and realized that daybreak was well and truly here. She rose, dressed in a clean tunic and breeches, pulled on her boots, and braided back her short golden hair as best she could. Once dressed, she descended the winding stair to the great hall. There, a few servants shuffled about, preparing for the day. An older woman in House Tarth livery came forward, her hands clasped at her waist. My lady Ser Brienne, she corrected shyly, your father asked that you join him in the solar for breakfast. He said it's a fine morning for planning. Brienne suspected that planning involved looking over local maps, hearing what disputes had arisen in recent weeks, and deciding how best to deploy the small garrison that Evenfall Hall maintained. Though Tarth had been spared the worst ravages of the war, smugglers and reavers from the Stepstones sometimes troubled its coasts, and the island's remote eastern villages were occasionally threatened by corsairs out of Essos. She thanked the servant and proceeded toward the solar. The solar at Evenfall Hall was a warm, bright chamber on the southeastern side of the castle with windows overlooking the sea. Wooden chests and a large oaken table took up most of the space, and Lord Selwyn Tarth stood there, leaning on his cane while conversing with a man whose face Brienne recognized. It was Ser Gavin Mertens, a middle-aged knight loyal to House Tarth, once in service to her father's father. He had a neatly trimmed beard and wore plate and mail polished well enough to reflect the flickers of early sunlight. Upon hearing Brienne's footsteps in the hallway, Lord Selwyn turned. He smiled, though she saw the lines of age more clearly etched in his face than she remembered. "Good morning, my child." "Father," she said, bowing her head in polite greeting, then nodded to Ser Gavin. "My lord." Ser Gavin offered a slight bow in return. "It warms my old heart to see you again, my lady. Your deeds in King's Landing have not gone unremarked here. Word travels even across these seas." Brienne inclined her head, letting the praise pass without comment. "Father, you requested my presence?" "Yes," Lord Selwyn said, gesturing to the table where a few scrolls were spread out. "We're discussing matters of the coastline. There have been sightings of a band of pirates harassing fishermen along the southwestern shore. Ser Gavin thinks we should send a small force to deal with them, lest they grow bold and strike deeper inland." Ser Gavin cleared his throat, tapping the hilt of his sword. We had a fisherman come in a fortnight ago reporting that 2 of his friends never returned from the reefs. He found the wreckage of their boat and signs of violence. Blood on the planks. We suspect a pirate crew has taken to lurking in the coves, waiting for easy prey." Brienne's joy tightened. It did not surprise her. War-torn Westeros had plenty of desperate men who turned to banditry or piracy, and Tarth was a tempting spot for small-scale raids. "Do we know how large their crew might be?" she asked, stepping closer to examine the map. She traced a finger along a small inlet marked as Shaybend Cove, a place she remembered from childhood excursions. Ser Gavin shrugged. "We suspect a dozen men, maybe fewer. Most likely they're lightly armed. But they know the shoreline well and have at least one seaworthy vessel large enough to carry them around the island's rocky edges." Lord Selwyn's gaze rested on his daughter. "If you're willing, Brienne, you might take a handful of our best guards and see to it that these raiders are driven off or captured. I can't allow them to terrorize my people." Brienne nodded. "Of course. I'll prepare to leave by midday." She reached for one of the scrolls, another fishing report apparently, and scanned the shaky handwriting. It confirmed that strange sails had been glimpsed near the southwestern coastline. She glanced up. "I'll take Podrick, Ser Gavin, and 5 of our men. That should be enough. We'll ride to the nearest village and question the locals." Lord Selwyn exhaled, relief evident in his features. "Thank you, my child. I know you didn't come home to jump right back into conflict, but—" She shook her head, gentling her tone. "No apologies are needed. This is my duty. If there's a threat to Tarth, I want to face it." Ser Gavin's face brightened in approval. "I'll see to the arrangements. We can depart within a few hours, once supplies are readied." He bowed once more and, after a courteous nod from Lord Selwyn, departed the solar to gather the men. Lord Selwyn motioned for Brienne to sit at the small table near the windows, where a simple breakfast of fruit, bread, and cheese awaited. "You'll want a hearty meal before you go." Brienne obliged, aware that she ought not head into danger on an empty stomach. While she ate, her father carefully lowered himself into a chair, setting his cane aside. A pensive silence hung between them until he spoke. "You look well, but I see the worry in your eyes. Are you uneasy about this mission?" "No," Brienne answered, breaking off a piece of bread. "I'm only sorry that Tarth isn't more secure. I wish the realm's troubles didn't spill over onto our shores." She took a sip of watered wine. "But if they do, I'll handle them." Lord Selwyn nodded solemnly. "You always had a protective spirit, even as a child. I recall you standing up to older boys who teased the servants or the stable hands. I have no doubt you'll do what must be done." His voice carried a gentle pride, and it gave Brienne a flicker of warmth. She felt no arrogance in her task. Rather, she knew that, after the horrors of war, a few pirates might seem minor. Yet to the fishermen of Tarth, these brigands posed a real threat. She would not minimize that danger. When she finished eating, she rose and kissed her father's brow. I'll see you soon. Leaving the Solar, she ascended the tower stairs to her chamber where she donned her familiar armor, mail, and plate, buckling each strap with practiced efficiency. She belted Oathkeeper at her hip, the Valyrian steel a comforting weight. Quickly, she gathered a cloak of sturdy wool, checking its fastenings to ensure it wouldn't catch on brambles or boat rigging. Finally, she found Podrick in the courtyard, already clad in light mail and a leather jerkin, his sword sheathed at his belt. He brightened upon seeing her. "Sir Brienne, I heard we're dealing with pirates?" She nodded. "Yes. We leave soon. Have you eaten?" Podrick patted his belly. "A small breakfast. I'm ready to go." Brienne regarded him for a moment, noting how he had grown leaner, stronger since she first took him on. He still looked young, but he had a steadiness to him that reassured her. "Good. Let's see to the horses." They made their way across the courtyard, where stable hands readied 7 mounts. Ser Gavin was already there, tightening the girth on his chestnut mare. Beside him were 5 men-at-arms, each in House Tarth livery of pale pink and yellow quartered with the sun's and moon's sigil. Brienne greeted each man, exchanging nods of acknowledgement. Soon enough, they set out through the castle gates into the bright mid-morning light, passing under the watchful eyes of the gate guards. The path from Evenfall Hall to the southwestern shores wound through gentle hills, dotted with small orchards and far land. Villagers occasionally paused in their work to wave or bow. Brienne waved back, though she maintained a focused expression, her mind on the task ahead. She considered possible strategies. If the pirates were operating from a hidden cove, it might be necessary to lure them out or catch them at low tide. Podrick rode beside her, occasionally glancing over at the men-at-arms who murmured about local gossip or shared jokes to pass the time. Ser Gavin rode at the front, leading the way. Overhead, the sky remained a patchwork of drifting clouds, the threat of rain lessening as the morning wore on. By midday, they reached a small village perched near the edge of Tartha's western forests. Smoke curled from a few chimneys, and children ran barefoot along the dirt paths. It was not a large settlement, perhaps a dozen huts clustered around a central well, but it boasted a tidy little sept and a communal pen for goats and chickens. As Brienne and her party approached, the villagers paused their tasks to stare. An older man, presumably the headman, came forward, wringing his hands nervously. "My lady." "Ser Brienne, is it?" he asked, voice trembling slightly. "We heard you'd returned. Does this visit concern the pirate menace?" Brienne dismounted. "Yes. We've heard rumors they've been active along this shore. Have they troubled you here?" The headman swallowed. He had a thin face, weathered by years of labor, and his beard was streaked with gray. "Not directly, my lady. But some of our fishermen are too afraid to go out beyond the shallows. They say they've seen strange sails, men with crossbows on the deck. And we found a body washed ashore 3 days past. Didn't recognize him, but he wore ragged clothes, had a cut across his belly. It's been unsettling." Brienne exchanged glances with Ser Gavin. It confirmed that the pirates were indeed active. "Which way to the cove where the fishermen have seen them?" The headman pointed southwest, toward a line of rugged cliffs. "If you follow the cliff path for about an hour, you'll come upon a rocky descent. Shaben Cove, we call it. It's known for titterpools. I'd wager that's where they're lurking." "Thank you," Brienne said. "We'll investigate. In the meantime, warn your neighbors not to fish alone or wander too close to that area." The headman bowed hastily. "We will. 7 watch over you, my lady." With that, Brienne remounted and the party continued along the path the headman had indicated. The terrain grew rockier, the grasses thinning as they neared the cliffs. Seabirds wheeled overhead, their sharp cries echoing in the briny air. Podrick's mount snorted, uneasy on the unfamiliar ground, but he guided the horse carefully. Before long, they reached a point where the path narrowed along a steep bluff. Below them, the sea crashed against jagged rocks in white foam. Wind whipped at Brienne's cloak. She slowed her mare to a cautious walk, mindful that a single misstep could lead to a nasty tumble into the surf. Ser Gavin, at the front, signaled a halt where the path widened again, overlooking a shallow bay. From this vantage, they could see that a narrow cut in the cliff face led down to a stretch of gravelly beach. The cove itself was partially sheltered by an outcropping of black rock that jutted into the water like a crooked finger. "There," Ser Gavin said, pointing. "Looks like the ideal spot for a hidden landing." Brienne squinted, following his gesture. The cove appeared deserted at first glance, but she couldn't be certain. "We should dismount and proceed on foot. The horses will make too much noise on that descent." Ser Gavin nodded in agreement. He gestured for 2 of the men-at-arms to remain at the top of the path with the horses, keeping watch. The rest tied their mounts to a few scrubby bushes and followed Brienne on foot, carefully descending the switchback trail. The sharp tang of salt air intensified as they approached the beach. Barnacles clung to the lower rocks and seaweed drifted in tidal pools. The day was still bright, but the sunlight didn't chase away the sense of tension in the air. Podrick stepped beside Brienne, scanning the rocky shoreline with keen eyes. She saw his hand grip the hilt of his sword, though he hadn't drawn it yet. The men-at-arms spread out slightly, forming a loose line behind Ser Gavin and Brienne. They moved slowly, boots crunching on gravel. The only sounds were the rhythmic crash of waves and the distant cries of gulls. At first, they found no sign of a pirate vessel or even footprints. Perhaps the raiders had sailed off to another section of the island. But then, near a cluster of boulders at the far end of the cove, Brienne spotted driftwood arranged in a haphazard pile. When she moved closer, she realized it wasn't mere driftwood. It looked like the remains of a small boat's hull, badly splintered. Dark stains smeared some of the planks, turning them a shade that could only mean blood. She raised a hand, signaling the others to halt. Podrick inhaled sharply. "Gods," he whispered. "That must be what's left of the fisherman's boat." Brienne crouched and touched one of the planks. The wood was damp, but fresh enough that it hadn't fully rotted. "This happened recently," she murmured. "Within the last few days, I'd guess." She straightened, scanning the surrounding rocks. "Stay alert." The men spread out, searching for tracks. Eventually, one of them called out, "Ser Brienne, over here." The voice came from a ledge a short distance above the high tide line. She hurried over, stepping carefully on wet stones. The man-at-arms pointed to a series of footprints in the sandy soil above the rocks. They led toward a narrow crevice in the cliff face. Ser Gavin joined them, squinting at the footprints. "Could be half a dozen men, maybe more. Looks like they went inland." Brienne nodded grimly. "Then we'll follow. Carefully. They might be hiding in the cliffs." They advanced, weapons drawn now. Oathkeeper felt cool in Brienne's grasp, and she reminded herself that these were killers who had already taken local lives. She meant to see them stopped for good. Podrick stayed at her side, tension evident in the set of his shoulders. She placed a silent hand on his arm, reassurance, and pressed onward. The crevice in the rock opened into a shallow cave that smelled of damp stone and rotting fish. Sunlight filtered in from above through a crack, illuminating a rough tunnel that led deeper into the cliff. As they entered, their footsteps echoed. A faint sound up ahead made Brienne freeze. It was a low murmur of voices. She glanced at Ser Gavin, who nodded. They crept forward, hearts pounding. The tunnel curved slightly, revealing a wider chamber. There, in the dim light, Brienne saw at least 7 men clustered around a makeshift fire pit. Their clothing was ragged, their faces grimy. Several crossbows leaned against a rock wall, and Brienne recognized one man's belt decorated with the hilt of a stolen dagger, likely from a fisherman or traveler. Indeed, they looked every bit the pirates they had been warned about. Desperate scoundrels, armed and dangerous. One of the pirates noticed movement in the tunnel and shouted, "We're found out. Grab your steel." Instantly, chaos erupted. The pirates scrambled for their weapons, cursing. Brienne surged forward, Oathkeeper raised. Ser Gavin and 2 men-at-arms rushed at her sides, while Podrick and the other men fanned out to flank the raiders. The cave filled with the clang of steel. Brienne's first blow caught a pirate who lunged at her with a rusted sword. She deflected his strike, then slammed her pommel into his jaw, sending him sprawling. Another pirate raised a crossbow. Podrick quickly tackled him from behind, causing the bolt to fire harmlessly into the cave wall. The scuffle churned up dust and echoes. Ser Gavin engaged 2 of the pirates at once, moving with surprising agility for a man his age. His blade whirled, clashing against theirs, sparks flying in the dim light. One of the men-at-arms loosed a fierce war cry, driving back a gaunt, sunken-cheeked raider who wielded a wickedly curved knife. The pirate tripped, knocking over a small barrel of salted fish that rolled across the cave floor. Brienne found herself facing a hulking man with a patch over one eye. He snarled and swung a heavy axe at her torso. She sidestepped just in time, the blade biting into the rocky floor with a resounding clang. She brought Oathkeeper around in a clean arc, forcing the pirate to stagger back. He was strong, but she was stronger and better trained. Seizing a brief opening, she slashed downward, slicing into his sword arm. He roared in pain, dropping the axe. Blood spattered the cave floor. She kicked the axe away, prepared to offer him a chance to surrender, but he lunged at her with a dagger pulled from his belt. Without hesitation, she thrust Oathkeeper forward, running him through the chest. His one eye went wide, breath ragged, and he collapsed. Nearby, Podrick bashed the crossbowman in the head with the hilt of his sword, knocking him unconscious. Another pirate swung at him from the side, but Podrick ducked beneath the blow and landed a solid punch in the man's gut. Brienne caught a glimpse of the men-at-arms subduing another pair. One pirate tried to flee deeper into the cave, but Ser Gavin wrestled him to the ground, disarming him with a grunt of exertion. Panting, Brienne glanced around, assessing. 2 pirates lay dead, the hulking axeman and another who had been cut down by a guardsman's blade. 3 were groaning with injuries and 2 had been knocked unconscious. Not one had escaped. It had been a swift, brutal skirmish, but the knights and men-at-arms had prevailed. The men-at-arms quickly bound the survivors' hands behind their backs with strips of rope. Ser Gavin rubbed his shoulder, apparently bruised in the struggle, but otherwise unhurt. Podrick's face was streaked with sweat, and he had a small cut on his forearm where a pirate's knife had grazed him, though it didn't look too deep. Brienne wiped her blade clean on a ragged cloak she found near the fire pit. Her pulse hammered in her ears, but she maintained her composure, turning to face the captured pirates. One of them, a sallow-faced man with thin hair, glared at her defiantly. "You," he panted, "you're that she-devil. Killed the queen in King's Landing. We heard about you." A flicker of surprise passed through Brienne. She had not expected these men to know her name or deeds, but rumors traveled quickly, it seemed. She did not respond to his jibe, merely studied him. "You murdered innocent fishermen, terrorized villages. Why? For gold? For idle cruelty?" He spat on the ground, a mixture of blood and saliva. "Don't pretend you're any different, knight. We all kill, for one reason or another." Brienne's mouth tightened. She stepped away from him, letting the men-at-arms hoist him to his feet. "Bind them well. We'll take them back to Evenfall Hall to face justice," she told Ser Gavin. "We'll also search the cave for stolen goods or any sign of more accomplices." It took them the better part of an hour to sift through the pirates' makeshift hideout. They found a stash of dried fish and petty loot, silver trinkets, a few battered coins, and some personal effects that likely belonged to their victims. No sign of additional pirates emerged, and one of the captives snarled that their boat was hidden further north along the coastline, but had likely been damaged by a storm. They had ended up taking shelter in this cave, preying on any unlucky locals who crossed their path. By the time they finished, the sun hung low, filtering in through the crack in the cave roof. Brienne led the way back outside, wincing slightly at the transition from dimness to bright light. The tide had come in further, lapping at the rocks near the cave's entrance, though it remained passable. They coaxed the prisoners, 5 in total, 3 of them limping or bleeding, down the beach and back up the cliff trail. At the top, the men-at-arms retrieved the horses. Only 2 mounts were free for the captives, forced to ride double, flanked by guards who held their bonds. The other 3 would have to walk, closely guarded. Brienne surveyed the group, ensuring no one was left behind. One man-at-arms had a sprained ankle and Podrick's arm wound needed bandaging, but they could manage. Ser Gavin gave a decisive nod. "We'll head back to that village for the night. Safer than trying to push onto Evenfall Hall in the dark." "Agreed," Brienne said. "We'll post watches. These men might try to escape if we let down our guard." And so they retraced their route, a subdued column of weary knights, guards, and captives making its way along the bluff. The wind picked up, carrying the scent of the sea and a faint promise of rain. Darker clouds now hovered on the horizon, though the sunset still cast streaks of gold and rose across the sky. They reached the village just as dusk was deepening. The headman and a handful of villagers emerged with lanterns, their faces tense when they saw the bound pirates. Brienne assured them that these raiders would face justice at Evenfall Hall. The villagers, while relieved, looked wary. Clearly, the memory of recent violence had not faded. As the men-at-arms set up camp in the village's small common area, Brienne approached a young septon who maintained the modest local September. "My squire was wounded," she explained. "Do you have any poultices or bandages we could use?" The septon, a man with kind eyes and a soft voice, immediately agreed to help. They retreated to the sept's interior, a single-room stone structure simply decorated with candles and a small altar. Podrick removed his leather jerkin, revealing a shallow gash across his forearm. The septon examined it by lantern light and gently cleaned the wound, then applied a poultice of herbs with cooling properties. Podrick winced but didn't protest. "You fought well today, Pod," Brienne said quietly, holding the lantern as the septon worked. "You're improving." Podrick managed a faint smile. I was just doing my part, Ser Brienne. Couldn't let them shoot us with those crossbows." Brienne nodded, recalling the moment he'd tackled the crossbowman. "You saved at least one of our men from a bolt in the back. I'd call that well done." Podrick's cheeks colored slightly, and he ducked his head. Brienne recognized the mixture of pride and embarrassment in him. Though he wanted to be seen as a knight, he still wrestled with the old insecurity that had followed him for so long. She placed a firm hand on his shoulder. "I'd trust you at my side in a fight, Podrick. Remember that." When the Septon finished wrapping the wound with clean linen, Brienne thanked him and left a small donation at the altar for the village's upkeep. Outside, the air had grown cooler and a few drops of rain pattered on the dusty ground. The men-at-arms had arranged a makeshift camp near a barn where the headman allowed them to store the prisoners for the night, under guard. Ser Gavin stood by, ensuring the ropes were secure and the barn door locked from outside. A single lantern glowed within, illuminating the sullen faces of the captured pirates. Brienne turned to the headman, who hovered nearby, wringing his hands. "We'll leave at first light," she said. "Thank you for your hospitality." The headman bobbed his head. "We're grateful to you, my lady. I doubt we could have driven those men off ourselves." She offered a curt nod. "If any other trouble arises, send word to Evenfall Hall." They took what rest they could. Podrick, Brienne, Ser Gavin, and the men-at-arms slept in a row of bedrolls inside the small communal hall, which at least offered a roof against the light drizzle. One of the men stood watch at all times, rotating through the night. Brienne did not sleep deeply. She dreamt fleetingly of the trial in King's Landing, of Cersei's final, defiant stare. But she forced the memory away and reminded herself that she was in Tarth now, her home, protecting those who truly needed it. By dawn, the rain had ceased, leaving the air crisp and fresh. They broke their fast on bread and cold saltfish, then readied themselves for the journey back. The prisoners remained bound and sullen, their injuries tended just enough to keep them from dying on the road. Brienne wanted them alive, that they might answer for their crimes before Lord Selwyn's judgment. The ride took most of the day, the group trudging along at a measured pace to accommodate the captives on foot. The countryside looked more welcoming now, with the storm clouds gone and the sun shining down on fields of wildflowers. Villagers they passed offered curious, sometimes apprehensive glances at the pirates, but many recognized the livery of House Tarth and waved in respect, relieved that order was being upheld. They reached Evenfall Hall late in the afternoon. Guards opened the gates at once, and stable hands hurried to take the horses. Lord Selwyn himself hobbled down from the keep steps, leaning heavily on his cane. His brow creased when he saw the bound men, blood-stained and weary, but he nodded in satisfaction to see that Brienne and her party were unharmed. Ser Gavin dismounted with a groan of relief. "My lord, these are the pirates who have plagued the southwestern shores. We captured them in a cave near Shalebend Cove." Lord Selwyn's gaze passed over the prisoners. "Take them to the dungeons. We'll arrange a proper hearing tomorrow." One of the pirates opened his mouth to hurl an insult, but a swift jab from a guard silenced him. They were led away, stumbling, into the depths of Evenfall's walls. Lord Selwyn turned to Brienne and Podrick. "You've done well. I trust they offered stubborn resistance." Brienne nodded. "They fought. 2 of them fell. The rest are alive to face judgment." The older man's eyes flicked to the dark patches of blood on Brienne's gauntlets and the bandage on Podrick's arm. "Get yourselves cleaned up. You've earned a proper meal tonight." "Thank you, Father," Brienne said quietly. She and Podrick headed to their chambers, stopping only to hand over their gear to the armory servants for cleaning. Brienne took a few moments to wash away the grime of travel, sponging her face and arms with warm water from a basin. She slipped into a fresh tunic, feeling a twinge of relief. The tension of the skirmish lingered in her muscles, a reminder that, while Cersei's war was over, smaller battles still dotted the land. That evening, the castle's great hall was livelier than usual. News of the pirates' capture had spread, and the staff and garrison felt a measure of relief. A roasted boar had been prepared, basted with honey and herbs, filling the air with a rich aroma that made Brienne's stomach rumble. She sat at the high table with her father, Podrick, Ser Gavin, and a few other notable retainers. They toasted with cups of watered wine, not in celebration of violence but in gratitude that Tartha's people were now safer. As they dined, Lord Selwyn leaned toward Brienne. "I've sent a raven to Storm's End to inform them that the pirate threat on our shores is resolved. I suspect they'll be glad to hear it. Fewer raids might mean more trade between our coasts." Brienne nodded. "That would be good for Tarth. And for the whole region." She glanced around the hall, noticing the mix of smiles and relief among the servants. It reminded her that peace was more than an absence of grand wars. It was the small victories against lawlessness and cruelty that allowed ordinary folk to live without fear. Toward the end of the meal, the doors opened to admit another figure. A tall, lean man in a travel stained cloak strode in, escorted by 2 guards. His dark hair was flecked with silver, and a short beard framed a face lined with the marks of hard journeys. He wore the sigil of House Baratheon on a leather jerkin. Lord Selwyn recognized him at once, Ser Roderick Storm, a distant cousin to the Baratheons, known to serve as a messenger and scout for the Stormlands. He approached the high table with a bow. "My lord, I bring word from Storm's End." Brienne and the others set down their cups, giving him their attention. Lord Selwyn motioned for him to speak. "You're always welcome here, Ser Roderick. What tidings do you carry?" The messenger cleared his throat, retrieving a small parchment from inside his cloak. "I've been tasked to visit certain bannermen in the Stormlands and beyond, delivering official communications. Lord Mathis at Storm's End wishes to convey his thanks to you, Lord Selwyn, for dealing with the pirate issue." He paused, glancing at Brienne. "Also, there's news out of King's Landing that may concern you, Ser Brienne." Brienne straightened, her gaze intent. She had hoped her duties in King's Landing were finished, but something in Ser Roderick's voice indicated otherwise. "Go on." Ser Roderick hesitated, flicking his eyes around as if uncertain whether to speak in front of the entire hall. But Lord Selwyn nodded for him to continue, so he cleared his throat again. "It is said that Queen Daenerys Targaryen, wounded in the war but restored to health, has been consolidating her rule. The city is calmer under her command and the support of King Jon. But still there are whispers of unrest. Some in the Westerlands, I hear, refuse to bow to a Targaryen. Even if Cersei Lannister is gone, House Lannister's remnants remain scattered, with pockets of defiance. Forces loyal to the old queen, though fewer every day, may be stirring up trouble." Brienne absorbed this, feeling her heart sink slightly. She had hoped that Cersei's defeat would have ended Lannister opposition outright. But the history of Westeros proved that grudges often lingered beyond a single leader's downfall. "Are they a real threat?" she asked. Ser Roderick lifted a shoulder. "It's hard to say. Many surrendered after learning of Cersei's death. But some isolated lords, especially in the craggy regions near the Westerlands border, might still harbor ambitions. And the Iron Bank recouped its losses, meaning there's no easy goal to pay for a rebellion. Still, King Jon's men are stretched thin, and Queen Daenerys's dragons, well, they're not as numerous as once feared. There is only one left as far as I know." Brienne recalled hearing rumors that one of Daenerys's dragons had been lost in battle. The details were hazy, but the idea of a single dragon still present in Westeros was enough to keep potential rebels on edge. "So you believe the realm may face further turmoil?" she asked, her voice quiet. Ser Roderick exhaled. "It's possible. But for now, the Stormlands remain loyal and the crown is in better shape than it was. I only mention it because your name still carries weight in King's Landing. Some might hope you'll return if matters grow dire. The King's Guard is not yet fully replenished. They recall your refusal to join them immediately." Lord Selwyn's gaze fell on Brienne, a mixture of concern and resignation flickering across his features. "We should not meddle in these affairs," he said gently, "unless the crown specifically calls upon us or unless Tarth itself is threatened." Brienne nodded in agreement, though a sense of responsibility stirred in her gut. She had sworn to protect the realm, not merely Tarth. But she also knew she could not rush to King's Landing on every rumor of strife. "We'll see what the future holds," she said simply. After delivering his news, Ser Roderick was invited to share in the meal. He expressed gratitude, though his attention occasionally lingered on Brienne as if he expected more questions. She asked a few how the roads were in the Stormlands, whether any lords had declared open rebellion, and he answered that, for the moment, things seemed quiet. Still, she felt uneasy. The Lannister name still carried enough gold and cunning to spark troubles, especially if resentful bannermen found a figurehead to rally behind. When the feast concluded, Brienne excused herself, feeling a need for fresh air. Night had fallen, and the courtyard lay under a canopy of stars, the sea wind cool against her face. She made her way onto the ramparts, leaning on the stone battlements to gaze out over the dark waters. The ocean shimmered with faint moonlight, shifting waves that rose and fell with a calm steadiness. Somewhere out there was the rest of Westeros, lands still scarred by war, struggling to rebuild. Podrick joined her after a time, footsteps soft on the stone. "Ser Brienne," he said quietly, resting his forearms on the battlement beside her. "You seem troubled." She sighed. "I hope that with Cersei gone, the worst of the realm's conflicts might be behind us. Yet it seems there are always those who would cling to old grudges." Podrick glanced sidelong at her. "You can't save all of Westeros, Ser Brienne. You've done so much already." "I know," she replied, her tone tinged with regret. "But if the crown truly needs me, if the king himself asks, can I refuse? Part of me wonders whether I should return to King's Landing. Not to join the Kingsguard permanently, but to ensure the peace holds. Queen Daenerys and King Jon might appreciate more allies they can trust." Podrick pursed his lips. "Then do you want to go back?" She hesitated. "I don't know. My father needs me here, and Tarth is my home. But the realm is large. I cannot ignore that." Her voice trailed off. She stared at the ocean, recalling all the heartbreak she had witnessed in the capital, the labyrinth of politics, the ever-shifting alliances. She thought of Sansa Stark, now secure in the north, and of Arya Stark wandering distant lands. She hoped they were well. Podrick spoke again, gently. In any case, we can wait for a true summons. If there's real danger, they'll send word. You deserve time here, Ser Brienne. To heal. She nodded slowly. Yes, you're right. The tension in her chest eased, and she remembered how short a time it had been since she'd returned to Tarth. How she'd already been drawn into a skirmish with pirates. Perhaps she needed to let herself remain in one place for a while, helping her father and her people without constantly gazing westward for fresh conflict. They stood in companionable silence, the soft rush of the sea below them. At length, Podrick yawned. I might retire if you don't need me further. My arm's still a bit sore. Brienne offered a faint smile. Go on. Get some rest. I'll follow soon. After he left, Brienne lingered on the ramparts, letting the moon climb higher in the sky. The distant roll of thunder reminded her that storms were always forming. Even in peace, storms could come. Yet if she were needed, she would face them sword in hand. For now, she would keep watch here, on Tarth's shore. Morning dawned, bringing the promised hearing for the captured pirates. Lord Selwyn presided over a small gathering in the Great Hall, a far less grand affair than any trial in King's Landing, yet no less solemn for the islanders. The 5 surviving pirates were hauled in, chains clinking on the stone floor. They squinted in the light of the torches and the stained glass windows depicting Tarth's sigil. Brienne stood to one side, arms folded, while Podrick and Ser Gavin flanked her. Lord Selwyn called forth the villagers who had been impacted by the pirates' raids, fishermen who had lost kin, the headman from the coastal village, and even a tearful wife whose husband had disappeared, presumed slain. One by one, they offered testimony, eyes burning with hurt and anger. The pirates glowered or stared at the floor, some trembling, others sullenly defiant. When the testimony ended, Lord Selwyn weighed their crimes. The men had robbed, murdered, and caused terror among Tarth's small folk, while Westeros had seen far worse atrocities in its wars that did not lessen these men's guilt. According to Tarth's law, the penalty for piracy and murder was death, unless there was a mitigating reason to grant mercy. The Lord asked each of the pirates if they had anything to say. Most kept silent, though one shouted curses, proclaiming that the giant wench who killed the queen was the true murderer, that only sealed his fate in the eyes of the hall. Lord Selwyn pronounced the sentence. 3 of them, including the foul-mouthed man, were to hang. The other 2, who had surrendered more readily, were offered a chance at the wall if they wished to take the black and serve in the Night's Watch. One spat at the idea, while the other, a wiry youth who could not have been much older than Podrick, wept and accepted. The spitter was thus condemned to hang with the others. The hall fell silent as the guards dragged the condemned men away. Brienne kept her expression impassive, though inside she felt a mix of grim resolution and pity. These men had chosen a path of bloodshed. She was no stranger to killing, yet she never took pleasure in it. Still, justice had to be done. Afterward, she accompanied her father to the courtyard, where a scaffold had been hastily erected. Those sentenced to die by the rope faced their end without ceremony. The final one, the sallow-faced man who had recognized Brienne in the cave, used his last breath to curse her and proclaim that all knights were killers. She stood witness, saying nothing. The trapdoors dropped, ropes snapped taut. It was over in moments. Lord Selwyn exhaled heavily as the bodies were cut down and prepared for burial or burning. He looked old and weary again, leaning on his cane. Brienne gently guided him away, letting the guards handle the aftermath. Together, they walked through even Fall's corridors until they reached a quieter gallery filled with tapestries of Tarth's past. There, he sank onto a bench, massaging his knee. I loathe such ugliness, he murmured half to himself. But these are the burdens of rule. Brienne sat beside him. You carried it well, father. He cast her a sidelong glance. Better to handle it swiftly so our people might move on. I know you've seen far worse in your travels. Still, I wish we lived in gentler days. Brienne clasped her hands, reflecting on the merciless realities she had witnessed. So do I. But all we can do is uphold justice where we can. Lord Selwyn nodded, a solemn light in his eyes. You've always believed in that. I'm thankful you're here. They passed a time in pensive silence, father and daughter taking comfort in each other's presence. The castle hummed with subdued activity around them, guards patrolling the walls, servants tidying the hall after the trial, courtiers quietly discussing the next tasks. Through an open window, Brienne saw the sea sparkling under the midday sun, seemingly unconcerned with mortal affairs. In the days that followed, life at Evenfall Hall returned to its customary rhythm. The southwestern coast reported no further pirate sightings, and fishermen cautiously resumed their work. Brienne took Podrick on daily patrols around the neighboring villages, ensuring stability and offering reassurance to the smallfolk. She found a mild satisfaction in handling these localized duties. Her father often reminded her that she was making a difference in these people's lives just as surely as she had in King's Landing. The scale might be smaller, but the good she could do felt tangible and immediate. Each evening, though, she felt a lingering restlessness, as if a part of her still expected some distant call to arms. The talk of possible unrest in the Westerlands nagged at her mind. She told herself that if the realm truly needed her, a raven would arrive. Until then, she would do her duty here. Summer crept into Tarth, bringing hotter days and calmer seas. The orchard outside Evenfall Hall burst into full bloom, the scent of blossoms drifting through the courtyard. Podrick's arm healed well, leaving only a faint scar that he wore with a measure of pride. He continued to train under Brienne's watchful eye, gradually learning to wield both sword and shield with increased confidence. Ser Gavin joined them often, offering pointers and reminiscing about the days when a younger Brienne had sparred in that same courtyard. One late afternoon, while Brienne and Podrick practiced sword forms, a servant hurried into the courtyard, breathless. "Ser Brienne, a messenger has arrived by boat. He bears a royal seal from King's Landing." Brienne's heart jolted. She exchanged a glance with Podrick. "Where's he?" she asked. "In the main hall, my lady Ser Brienne," the servant said, bowing slightly. "He asked for you by name." Brienne swallowed. At last, she thought, the realm calls again. She handed her practice blade to a passing stable hand and hurried inside with Podrick on her heels. They reached the main hall, where her father was already speaking in low tones with a tall man in dusty black and gold attire. A raven emblem symbolic of a royal messenger was embroidered on his sleeve. He held a scroll in one hand. At Brienne's approach, the messenger bowed. "Ser Brienne of Tarth, I presume. I come bearing a royal summons from the crown. King Jon Targaryen, commonly known as Jon Snow but crowned by Queen Daenerys, requests your presence in King's Landing. He asks you to assist in stabilizing matters in the Westerlands." Enclosed is an official letter sealed with the royal sigils. He offered the parchment. Brienne took it, breaking the wax seal with cautious fingers. The letter was succinct, written in the king's own hand, albeit likely with a scribe's assistance. "To Ser Brienne of Tarth, I write to you on behalf of the crown in unity with Queen Daenerys. We have heard of your service in the trial by combat that sealed the fate of Cersei Lannister, and we remain grateful. Yet unrest stirs in certain pockets of the Westerlands where some lords refuse to bend the knee. Their defiance threatens the fragile peace. Your reputation for honor, courage, and fairness is known. We humbly request that you return to King's Landing and then accompany a royal envoy to the Westerlands to parley or, if needed, enforce the crown's rule with as little bloodshed as possible. We ask this of you, trusting your integrity and skill. The realm still heals from war, and your presence may help avoid renewed conflict. Please come with haste. By my hand and Daenerys's will. King Jon Targaryen." Brienne set the parchment down, exhaling. So the rumors were true, eh? Rebellious lords in the Westerlands, possibly trying to rouse a Lannister revival. And the king asked for her by name, hoping that her role in Cersei's downfall would lend weight to any negotiations. She felt a familiar pull of duty, a reminder that the realm was bigger than her island. Yet she glanced at her father, concern flickering in her blue eyes. "Father, the letter is clear. The king needs my aid." Lord Selwyn's face, lined with age, showed resignation. "I see. Then you must decide whether to go." Podrick hovered at Brienne's side, practically quivering with anticipation. She suspected he longed to accompany her. She let out a long breath. Part of her wanted to remain on Tarth, but she knew the realm's stability was precarious. If she could help avert another war, she would. "I should go," she said at last, her voice calm but resolute. "For the good of the realm." Lord Selwyn nodded slowly. "I cannot deny that your presence might prevent bloodshed. King Jon's request seems measured." He placed a gentle hand on her shoulder. "But know you will always have a home here. Return to us when you can." Brienne felt a wave of gratitude. "I will, father." She turned to Podrick. "Will you come with me?" His eyes lit up. "Of course, Ser Brienne. If you'll have me." She managed a small smile, though worry tugged at her heart. "Good. I'll need a reliable squire. The royal messenger inclined his head. I am to sail back to the mainland in 2 days. If you wish to accompany me, we can make the crossing together. Or you may travel by your own means. The king asked for haste, but the specifics are up to you. 2 days, Brienne repeated, glancing at her father. She would need time to pack, to say her goodbyes. That should suffice. We'll sail with you. The messenger bowed again. I'll await your readiness at the harbor. With that, the man departed, leaving the letter in Brienne's hand. She stared at the blocky, careful script, her mind churning. Memories of King's Landing, of the Red Keep's twisting corridors, of the great September's courtyard where she had killed Cersei, all flooded back. Now she would return, not to face an old enemy, but to uphold the peace. In her heart, she prayed this mission would not become another long, bloody conflict. Lord Selwyn sighed, stepping forward to embrace her gently. I had hoped you would remain longer, but I know you must do what is right, my child. His voice softened. Honor is a burden few can bear. Yet you do so with grace. Brienne swallowed the lump in her throat, hugging him back. Thank you, father. I'll come back as soon as I can. And I'll do all in my power to keep the peace. That night, she packed her possessions quietly, methodically. Podrick did the same, though he occasionally asked if she felt nervous about returning to the city. She admitted she did, but also acknowledged that she had faced graver fears and survived. When dawn broke on the second day, the household assembled to bid them farewell. Lord Selwyn gave Brienne a small chest of coin to cover any expenses, while Ser Gavin clasped arms with her, wishing them success. They rowed down to the harbor under a bright sky, gulls wheeling overhead. The messenger's ship, a sturdy cog flying the crown's banner, awaited them. Its crew bustled about, loading supplies for the journey to the mainland. Brienne looked back at Evenfall Hall, its walls glowing in the sunshine, and felt a pang of longing. She had only begun to settle here, to reclaim some sense of peace. But duty called. She reminded herself that many would do anything to have a champion who truly cared about the realm's people. She could not forsake that call. Podrick guided the horses aboard, and Brienne followed, her cloak catching a stray gust of wind. A sailor pulled up the gangplank, and soon the cog's sails unfurled, catching the breeze. The vessel pulled away from Tartha's dock, leaving the island behind. Brienne stood at the stern, watching her father's silhouette on the pier grow smaller and smaller. Eventually, Evenfall Hall merged with the distant cliffs, and the Sapphire Isle was just a dark line on the horizon. She turned her face to the open sea, the salt air stirring her senses. Podrick stood beside her, quiet but resolute. The messenger approached, nodding politely. We should reach the mainland by tomorrow if the winds hold, then make our way to King's Landing. Brienne thanked him, then fell silent, allowing the repetitive slap of waves on the hull to calm her thoughts. She could almost hear the faint echoes of destiny carrying her westward again, toward the capital, toward the heart of the realm's politics and power struggles. She did not relish the idea of stepping back into courtly intrigue. Yet if her presence could spare the small folk another war or keep the realm from fracturing further, she would not hesitate. The day wore on in a blur of sea spray and gull cries. Brienne and Podrick found a quiet corner on deck to practice a few sword forms, albeit carefully. Avoid alarming the crew. The messenger watched with mild curiosity but said nothing. The sailors navigated steadily, one eye on the wind, the other on the darkening clouds that gathered overhead. Night descended with gentle rain, forcing them to take shelter below deck in cramped quarters. Brienne slept fitfully in a narrow bunk, lulled by the ship's rolling motion. She dreamed of the Great Hall in King's Landing and of Jaime Lannister's voice echoing from somewhere just out of sight. She half expected to see Cersei's accusing gaze. But instead, when she turned, there was only a swirl of darkness. Morning brought them in sight of Westeros's eastern coast. Low hills and a sandy shoreline stretched before them, and the sailor at the helm guided the cog into a small harbor. Once docked, Brienne and Podrick disembarked with their horses, while the messenger arranged to travel by road. The man explained they would ride north for a day or two, then join the King's Road as it curved toward the capital. They set off, encountering occasional travelers on the coastal road, merchants, farmers, a few soldiers. Signs of rebuilding were apparent in some villages, with half-finished roofs and repaired fences. Brienne took note that the realm was still healing from the ravages of war. The presence of the crown's men along the roads was more consistent than she remembered from the war's darkest days, suggesting that Daenerys and Jon were making efforts to restore order. The second night, they stopped at a modest inn where the messenger showed his royal sigil to secure stabling for the horses and lodgings. Podrick seemed relieved to rest in a proper bed again, though he offered to stand watch if Brienne wished. She declined, trusting this inn to be reasonably safe, and instead spent the evening in subdued conversation with the messenger. She learned that his name was Garth Rosby, of minor nobility in the Crownlands, and that he had served as a courier for King Jon since the final days of the war. He spoke respectfully of both Jon and Daenerys, though he admitted tensions lingered among the old houses who had once opposed the Targaryens. At dawn, they pressed on. By midday, the looming walls of King's Landing appeared on the horizon, crowned by the familiar shape of the Red Keep. Brienne's stomach tightened. She had left this place hoping never to return, yet here she was. The city spread along the Blackwater Rush, its streets bustling with renewed commerce, if the lines of carts and people at the gates were any indication. Once inside, the throngs of small folk parted around their small party, many craning their necks to see who arrived under the crown's banner. A few recognized Brienne, some pointed, whispering about the woman who had killed Cersei. She ignored the stares, focusing on keeping her horse steady in the cramped streets. Garth Rosby led them through the gates of the Red Keep, past gold cloaks who saluted with measured curiosity. Inside the castle courtyard, Brienne dismounted, memories flooding back. The last time she had stood here, she had been hailed as a champion of the faith, about to face Cersei Lannister in mortal combat. Now, it felt like a lifetime ago. Podrick swung down from his saddle, patting the horse's neck. A cluster of attendants hurried forward, and Garth Rosby turned to Brienne. "If you'll come with me, Sir Brienne, I'll bring you before the king." She nodded, heart pounding. This was it. The moment when she would learn exactly what the crown required of her. She patted Podrick's shoulder. "See the horses stabled, then join me." Podrick agreed, and Brienne followed Garth through the keep's corridors. Familiar tapestries and gilded doors flitted by, though the air felt different, less tense, perhaps, than in Cersei's final days. Occasionally, they passed a guard in Targaryen or Stark livery, each nodding politely. Eventually, they reached the throne room's antechamber, where a handful of petitioners and courtiers waited. Garth approached a royal steward, murmured a few words, and the steward nodded, motioning them forward. Brienne entered the throne room. It looked much as she remembered, vast, with high vaulted ceilings and intricate pillars. The iron throne perched on its raised dais, a monstrous seat of twisted swords. But it was not Daenerys or Jon occupying it today. Instead, the dais was empty, though a line of Queen's Guard, men in dark armor with three-headed dragon sigils, flanked the edges, and a handful of courtiers stood conversing quietly. Garth led Brienne toward a smaller side door behind the throne. A guard nodded them through. Beyond was a smaller, more private audience chamber that smelled faintly of incense. Rich tapestries depicting House Targaryen's conquests adorned the walls, and tall windows let in sunlight. There Brienne saw King Jon Targaryen. He rose from a carved wooden seat, wearing a simple dark tunic emblazoned with a silver wolf and dragon intertwined. His face bore the same solemn resolve she remembered from the war. Queen Daenerys stood beside him, platinum hair braided back, clad in a pale gray gown trimmed with black. A single dragon-shaped brooch pinned the cloak at her shoulder. Both regarded Brienne with a measured mixture of relief and respect. Jon spoke first. "Sir Brienne, thank you for coming so promptly." Brienne bowed her head, going down on one knee out of respect. "Your Grace, I received your summons and came as quickly as I could." Daenerys inclined her head, her violet eyes calm but inquisitive. "Rise, Sir Brienne. We have much to discuss." Brienne stood, noticing that Jon had a quiet intensity in his dark eyes. She had once sworn fealty to Sansa Stark in her quest to protect her, but now Sansa was queen in the north and Jon was the king for the rest. The lines of their alliances were complex, but she harbored no ill will. If anything, she respected Jon's sense of honor. Jon gestured to a table where a map of Westeros was unfurled, weighted at the corners with small figurines. "Let's speak plainly. We need your help in the Westerlands." Some lords who once served under Tywin Lannister or Cersei Lannister refused to acknowledge the new crown. They've seized small holdfasts, harassed loyal villages, and are rumored to be seeking a Lannister figure to rally behind, though none of that family remain in power. "We want to end this resistance before it grows." Daenerys nodded. "We hope to do so with minimal bloodshed. Many of the common folk in the Westerlands have already suffered. If they see you, renowned for bringing about Cersei's downfall without slaughtering half the city, they may be persuaded to submit without a fight." Brienne listened, arms crossed, mind churning. "I understand. And if they refuse?" Jon's jaw tightened. "Then we'll have no choice but to move against them militarily. But that's a last resort. We prefer they bend the knee." Daenerys added, "We'll send an envoy, my advisors, a few knights, possibly a token force of Unsullied for protection. We want you among them, Sir Brienne, as a voice of reason and an emblem of the crown's justice." Brienne swallowed. This was the very role she had always dreamed a true knight could fulfill, restoring peace with honor. "I'll do what I can, Your Grace." Jon's lips curved in a faint smile. "We're grateful. We know you have no personal stake in the Westerlands, but that's partly why we trust you. You won't push a hidden agenda." Queen Daenerys took a step closer, studying Brienne's face. "Will you need time to assemble men from Tarth?" Brienne shook her head. "I only brought my squire. Tarth is a small island. I wouldn't tear away its defenders unless absolutely necessary. We'll rely on whatever escort you deem fit." Daenerys nodded. "Then it's settled. We'll depart in a few days, once all is prepared. You'll stay in the Red Keep until then." Brienne exhaled softly. "Yes, Your Grace." She realized she would be returning to the halls where she had killed Cersei. The ghosts of that memory still lingered, but she steeled herself, reminding herself that duty came first. "I'll remain at your disposal." Jon inclined his head. "We'll have quarters prepared for you. Rest, Ser Brienne. We'll discuss details on the morrow." With that, the audience concluded. Brienne bowed again and departed, guided by a steward who led her through a series of corridors. Along the way, she glimpsed changes in the Red Keep, some new hangings depicting a dragon and a wolf, fewer gold lions. Yet the bones of the place remained the same. It would take more than a shift in power to erase centuries of history. When the steward showed her to a modest suite of rooms overlooking a courtyard, Podrick was already there, speaking with a castle servant. He turned, relief washing over his face upon seeing her. "Ser Brienne, did it go well?" She set down her traveling pack on a chair. "We'll be riding to the Westerlands in a few days with the king's envoys. Seems we're to help quell a rebellion." Podrick nodded slowly. "I see. Then we'll need to prepare supplies. And steel ourselves, I suppose." A flicker of concern passed over his features. "Are you sure you're all right with returning to the place of so many memories?" Brienne managed a thin smile. "I'll manage. At least this time, we're fighting to preserve peace, not tear the realm apart." Podrick bowed his head respectfully, but she could see the empathy in his eyes. "I'll stand by you, Ser Brienne. Whatever comes." She patted his shoulder lightly. "Thank you, Pod." Night descended on King's Landing, cloaking the Red Keep in flickering torchlight. Brienne took a short walk to the courtyard where she had once faced Cersei, now empty of onlookers. The marble tiles gleamed in the moonlight, the braziers unlit. A wave of memory crashed over her, Cersei's final sneer, the hush of the crowd, the swift strike of Oath Keeper. She let out a measured breath, reminding herself that that part of her life was over. Now she had a chance to use her sword to mend, not merely to kill. In the silent courtyard, she closed her eyes and lifted a silent prayer to the Seven. She prayed for the realm's peace, for her father's health, for Podrick's continued safety, and even for those misguided lords in the Westerlands who might yet see sense. When she opened her eyes, the moonlight shone on the worn stone. She felt no presence of ghosts, only a quiet resolve. She headed back inside to her quarters, determined to rest. On the morrow, she would meet with the king's advisors, plan her part in the envoy, and set forth once more. Though she had never sought the role of hero, she would not shy away from it if it spared the innocent more suffering. She was Brienne of Tarth, a knight forged in the fires of a world torn by war, and she would uphold her vow to protect, to bring justice without cruelty, to offer mercy without weakness, and to stand unflinching before the realm's darkest tides. So long as she drew breath, her sword and shield would serve the cause of a better Westeros. She slept fitfully, stirring from dreams of dark corridors and faint echoes of clashing steel. Near dawn, she woke and dressed in silence, the Red Keep's chill seeping into her limbs despite the humid summer air. Outside her window, King's Landing glowed with the soft grays and pinks of first light. She stood a moment, gazing across the rooftops and thinking of how many horrors these streets had seen and how many small mercies, too. This city was a crucible, forging both tyranny and heroism. She promised herself that she would do what she must to keep its people from suffering another cataclysm. When she descended the stairs to the courtyard, she found Podrick already awake, tugging on his bracers while pacing in front of the stables. He turned at the sound of her footsteps. "Ser Brienne," he greeted, voice still hushed with morning calm. "I heard we're to meet with the crown's advisors soon." She nodded. "Yes, in the council chambers. I want to be prompt so we can learn exactly how they plan to deploy us in the Westerlands." Podrick fell into step beside her as they crossed the courtyard. A few gold cloaks patrolled the ramparts, yawning and rubbing sleep from their eyes, but otherwise the keep was quieter than Brienne remembered from her earlier stays. During Cersei's reign, the tension had been tangible at all hours, as if the castle itself trembled with unspoken dread. Now, under Jon and Daenerys, there seemed a hush of cautious optimism. Not a perfect peace, no realm so scarred could be healed overnight, but the grim, coiled fear that had once choked every corridor was diminished. They passed into the Red Keep's main hall and traversed a series of torchlit passageways leading to the royal council chamber. Podrick had dressed neatly in a fresh doublet with the Tarth sigil on one shoulder, while Brienne wore her polished mail beneath a simple surcoat. She preferred practicality over finery, especially when wariness still lingered around every corner. A steward announced them at the council chamber doors. Within, Brienne saw a small group gathered around a circular table. King Jon Targaryen stood behind one of the carved chairs, head bent toward a tall, slender man with a neat beard and the look of a seasoned warrior. Queen Daenerys sat opposite, listening intently to an older woman whose robes marked her as one of the crown's logistical overseers. Also present were two members of Daenerys's Queen's Guard, standing at respectful attention. The conversation died down as Brienne and Podrick approached. "Sir Brienne," Jon said, stepping forward. His tone carried quiet warmth. "Good morning. This is Sir Martin Swan," he gestured to the bearded knight, one of our trusted allies. "And this is Lady Rosalind Moore, head of provisions and correspondence for the crown." The older woman, wearing a circlet of simple gold, nodded in greeting. Brienne inclined her head, then bowed to Jon and Daenerys. "Your graces." Daenerys offered a faint smile. "Come join us. We're finalizing the details of the envoy to the Westerlands." Brienne and Podrick stood near the table's edge while a steward poured watered wine into small cups. Maps lay spread across the polished wood. One large parchment depicted the Westerlands in detail: mountains, rivers, roads, and castles. A half-dozen small wooden tokens marked strongholds loyal to the crown, while 3 red-painted tokens rested on the map's far western side, representing strongholds that had yet to swear fealty. "These holdfasts," Sir Martin explained, tapping one of the red pieces, "lie under the nominal authority of Lord Craighall, who was among those refusing to bend the knee after Cersei's death. But the real trouble seems to be emanating from Duskendale Rock and Emberley." Duskendale Rock is a minor seat, not to be confused with the Crownland's own Duskendale. Emberley is a hilltop fortress that's historically loyal to House Lannister. Both have newly self-proclaimed lords who claim to speak for the old Lannister cause. Brienne studied the map. "How many men do they have?" Daenerys replied quietly, "Reports say each fortress could muster 200 or 300 at most, small forces, but enough to harass local villages and stir unrest if they band together." Jon's brow furrowed. "We want to avoid open battle if possible. Our garrisons are still rebuilding. Some of our best fighters remain in the north, aiding Queen Sansa with northern defenses. We can spare a modest detachment of the Unsullied for protection. But we'd prefer a diplomatic approach first. A show of force, yes, but tempered by reason. If these lords yield to us, we'll offer pardons provided they renounce their claims." Daenerys nodded. "I've lost enough men in this war. I have no desire to set the Westerlands aflame. We want to show them the crown is firm but fair." Brienne's gaze swept the table. "And you wish me to act as a mediator of sorts? A reminder of what happened to Cersei and that the crown doesn't deal lightly with treason." "Precisely," Daenerys said. "Your name carries weight. You slew the woman who once held them all in thrall. They'll know you as no friend to the old Lannister ways, but neither are you a butcher. You value honor. Sir Martin here will represent the crown's official authority while you will stand for its justice. I will send Missandei as my personal envoy, accompanied by Grey Worm and a contingent of Unsullied to ensure no harm befalls our emissaries." Jon turned to Lady Rosalind. "You have the supply lists? We can't travel with a full baggage train, but we need enough provisions for the journey and the retinue." She produced a thin stack of parchment. "Yes, Your Grace. We can manage a lean arrangement, enough to feed 40 men for 2 weeks. If you choose to remain longer, we'll send for additional supplies. But traveling light may be wise to avoid drawing suspicion or provoking a larger threat." Jon agreed, then returned his gaze to Brienne. "We'll gather the envoy outside the city gates in 2 days. Is that acceptable?" "We'd like to leave promptly." Brienne nodded. "That's sufficient time for me to prepare. I'll ensure my squire and I are ready." Daenerys steepled her fingers, her eyes reflecting a determined light. "Then it's settled. We ride west at dawn in 2 days. May the gods grant us a peaceful resolution." The meeting concluded with a few practical details. Brienne departed the chamber, Podrick at her side, her mind buzzing with anticipation and caution in equal measure. She had faced countless dangers, but the prospect of stepping into the Westerlands' heartland of Lannister influence brought fresh tension. If these rebel lords tested the crown's patience, she might be forced to demonstrate that treason against King Jon and Queen Daenerys would not be tolerated. Over the next 2 days, Brienne and Podrick prepared their horses, rechecked their gear, and collected the minimal supplies they would carry themselves. The rest would be transported by the Crown's train. They found their assigned quarters comfortable enough, and though memories of Cersei's trial still surfaced when Brienne wandered certain corridors, she managed to push them aside by focusing on her new task. Occasionally, she caught sight of Grey Worm, a silent, resolute figure in polished cuirass, marching through the keep with a handful of Unsullied. She admired their discipline, though she knew their presence could be intimidating. On the evening before departure, Brienne wandered briefly into the White Sword Tower, once the seat of the King's Guard, now partially repurposed to house the Queen's Guard as well. She recalled the days when she had fantasized about joining those ranks, hoping to uphold the ideals of knighthood. Now she saw that the structure was half empty, with only a few knights occupying the sparse chambers. She lingered near a plaque commemorating past Lord Commanders, many names she recognized: Ser Gerald Hightower, Ser Barristan Selmy, Ser Jaime Lannister. Her heart clenched at the last name. Whatever his sins, Jaime had proven himself in the end, at least to her. She wondered if his ghost lingered in these halls, or if all that remained was the battered memory of golden armor. At last, she left the tower and returned to her quarters, where Podrick was waiting. He had a thoughtful look on his face as he sorted through a small satchel. "Ser Brienne," he said quietly, "are you worried about tomorrow?" She glanced at him. "I wouldn't call it worry. More readiness. The Westerlands can be treacherous for anyone perceived as an enemy of House Lannister. But I trust in the King and Queen's plan." Podrick nodded, then plucked a small dagger from the satchel and slid it into a sheath on his belt. "I want to be sure we're prepared for anything," he said. "I remember how quickly things turned in the Riverlands or the Stormlands during the war." Brienne allowed herself a slight smile, touched by his earnest caution. "You've learned well, Pod. We'll keep our eyes open. Get some rest now. Dawn will come quickly." They rose before first light, dressing in their traveling gear. Brienne wore her lighter plate, which offered enough protection without overly restricting her movements during a long ride. Podrick followed suit, ensuring each strap was secure. They made their way to the outer courtyard where torches flickered in the pre-dawn darkness. A cluster of horses awaited, along with a line of black-clad Unsullied armed with short spears and swords. Ser Martin Swan, already mounted, oversaw final checks of provisions. The Sandai stood beside him, looking calm and composed in a flowing cloak of soft gray. She gave Brienne a polite nod. Grey Worm approached, quiet as ever, and inclined his head to Brienne. "Ser Brienne, we ride for the Westerlands. Are you ready?" She answered simply, "I am." Jon and Daenerys appeared next, descending from the keep's main steps. Daenerys wore a traveling gown of dark blue trimmed with silver, the Targaryen dragon coiled at her shoulders. Jon looked more warrior-like, clad in sturdy leathers and a thick cloak pinned with a direwolf sigil. Brienne could not help recalling rumors that Daenerys once rode a dragon into battle. Now, though, that power was reined in, used sparingly, if at all. Daenerys addressed the group in a clear voice. "You ride under our banner to secure the Westerlands' peace. Let no harm befall the innocent. Use the sword only when all else fails." She glanced at Jon, who stepped forward and placed a hand on Ser Martin's shoulder. "Ser Martin, you have the Crown's trust. Conduct the negotiations as we've discussed. The Sandai will speak with my voice, and Ser Brienne will uphold the realm's justice. Grey Worm, keep our people safe." Grey Worm inclined his head. Jon met Brienne's gaze. "The realm needs you, Ser Brienne. Thank you for answering the call." Brienne, ever humble, bowed. "I'll do my duty, Your Grace." With that, the envoys set out from the Red Keep, clattering across the cobblestones toward the city gates. Dawn streaked the sky with pale gold, and the streets gradually filled with onlookers, fishmongers opening stalls, children chasing each other, a few curious citizens who recognized the Unsullied spears and wondered where this official procession was heading. Brienne kept her face focused, ignoring the occasional whisper about the woman knight among them. They passed through the gate unchallenged, merging onto the King's Road. The day unfolded in a steady rhythm of hooves and footsteps. Brienne often rode near the front with Ser Martin, both scanning the countryside for any sign of trouble. Grey Worm and half the Unsullied remained behind them, while Missandei rode in the middle, occasionally consulting her notes for the negotiations. Podrick seemed comfortable in this routine. After so many years traveling with Brienne, he adapted easily to the discipline of the road. Over time, the farmland around King's Landing gave way to rolling hills. Villages appeared at intervals, some with newly rebuilt structures, testifying to the Crown's reconstruction efforts. When they halted for a midday rest in one such village, the peasants watched wide-eyed as Grey Worm's stoic soldiers passed. By evening, they had covered a fair distance and set camp near a shallow stream. Tents were erected with practiced efficiency. Brienne moved among the men, helping where she could. She noticed how the Unsullied worked in perfect silence, guided by subtle gestures from Grey Worm. Ser Martin, more talkative, commented on the shift in the realm's fortunes. If we manage to pacify these stubborn lords in the Westerlands, we may finally see a year without war. Brienne let out a low breath. One can hope. The realm has bled enough. Over the following days, they pressed deeper west. The hills grew rockier, the roads winding through wooded areas. Occasionally, they encountered a crown patrol exchanging news of local bandits or a breakdown in roads. None offered alarming reports. Missandei seemed relieved that no sign of major unrest lay ahead, though the Real test waited in the Westerland's mountainous interior. As they rode, Brienne found herself reflecting on her experiences on how she had once traveled these same roads in search of Sansa Stark, a mission that had seemed almost hopeless at the time. Now, she rode in the name of a new king and queen, forging alliances instead of chasing rumors. She wondered if Sansa was faring well in the north, safe and secure in Winterfell. The memory of how the Stark women had suffered under the Lannisters only reinforced Brienne's commitment to preventing further cruelty. One afternoon, they stopped at a wayside and perched near a gentle curve of the road. It was the last reliable inn for many leagues, according to Ser Martin. Inside, the common room bustled with travelers, merchants hauling wares between the Crownlands and the Westerlands, a handful of farmers and 2 hedge knights playing at dice. The innkeeper's eyes widened at the sight of the Unsullied and the crown banners, but he greeted them politely, setting aside a long table for their party. They ate a simple meal of roasted vegetables, bread, and ale. Brienne noticed that Grey Worm, seated at the end, barely touched his food, ever watchful. Missandei spoke quietly with him in a language Brienne did not understand, likely High Valyrian. Across the table, Ser Martin engaged Brienne in conversation about the potential rebel leaders. I've heard rumors that a certain Lady Aldarine Lannick claims distant kinship with House Lannister, he said in a low voice. She might style herself a rightful custodian of the Lannister legacy, twisted as that sounds. She's rumored to have joined forces with a minor lord named Ern Wavrin, who once fought for Cersei. Brienne folded her arms. Will they be open to negotiation? Ser Martin shrugged. That's what we hope. If they see they have no path to victory, they might surrender and swear fealty. Otherwise, he left the implication hanging. The crown would not permit a Lannister revival to spark further bloodshed. Podrick, listening in, ventured, could they be hoping for foreign gold? Like the Golden Company in the past? Ser Martin grimaced. The Golden Company were scattered when Daenerys invaded. Some mercenaries remain in Essos, of course, but I doubt these minor lords have the means to hire them. Still, we won't let our guard down. After the meal, Brienne stepped outside for a breath of fresh air. The inn's yard was ringed by a low fence, beyond which lay open fields and a backdrop of rolling hills. Dusk had fallen, the sky streaked with violet. She took in the scent of grass and distant cook fires. A moment later, footsteps approached Missandei, her slim figure wrapped in a traveling cloak. Ser Brienne, Missandei greeted softly. Might we speak privately? Brienne turned, nodding. Certainly. They moved to a quieter corner of the yard, near a small patch of herbs the innkeeper cultivated. The murmur of the inn's patrons drifted through the evening air. Missandei's expression was contemplative. I wanted to thank you, she said, for agreeing to serve as our champion of sorts in these negotiations. I know you might have preferred to remain on Tarth. Brienne shook her head. It's my duty. King Jon and Queen Daenerys have done much to restore order. I want to see that continue. Missandei folded her hands before her. Your presence will help show these rebel lords that we're not here to pillage or terrorize them. We only seek their loyalty to the rightful crown, not more war. She hesitated, eyes dropping briefly to the ground. If we can avoid violence, we must try. Brienne understood. She remembered hearing that Missandei was once a slave, freed by Daenerys, and that she hated the idea of more suffering. I agree. We'll give them every chance to stand down peacefully. Missandei looked relieved. Thank you. I'll do my part to speak gently in Daenerys' name, but if they mock our kindness, I fear Grey Worm's patience might run short. The Unsullied obey Daenerys, of course, yet they also have endured much. Mercy is not their first instinct. Brienne allowed herself a faint smile. Nor is it mine if I sense treachery. But we'll strive for reason. That's all we can promise. Missandei nodded, gratitude shining in her eyes. They parted ways, each returning to the inn. Brienne found Podrick dozing near the hearth and gently nudged him awake. Come on, Pod. Let's get some sleep while we can. 2 days later, the roads began to climb, winding into the rocky foothills that signaled the eastern edge of the Westerlands. The landscape shifted, limestone crags jutted from the earth, and pine forests dotted the slopes. The midday sun baked the stony ground, and a hot wind blew through narrow passes. Brienne rode at the head of the column, scanning each ridge with a critical eye, aware that ambushes could come from above. They saw fewer villages here, more scattered homesteads eking out a living in the hardscrabble soil. Occasionally, a traveling merchant wagon rumbled past, the driver eyeing their armed party with wary curiosity. Each night, they camped among the foothills, the Unsullied forming a vigilant perimeter. Brienne noticed how well-trained they were, no idle chatter, no signs of fatigue. Grey Worm moved among them like a ghost, issuing orders in hushed tones. On the morning of the 6th day since leaving King's Landing, they encountered the first sign of overt hostility. The road split around a bend where a tall pine had fallen, blocking their path. Brienne reined in her mare, heart pounding. It was unlikely the tree had fallen by chance, it looked as though it had been hacked at the base. Grey Worm raised a silent hand, halting the Unsullied, while Ser Martin cantered forward, scanning the surrounding ridge. Podrick, behind Brienne, murmured, "Could be a trap." "Likely," she whispered. She raised her voice, addressing the party. "Stay together. Keep your weapons at the ready." No sooner had she spoken than a volley of arrows hissed from the ridge. At least 3 soared overhead, clattering off rocks, while another sank into the dirt near an Unsullied's feet. The soldiers instantly raised shields. Brienne spurred her mare, drawing Oathkeeper. "Show yourself," she shouted, her voice echoing against the rocky slope. Another arrow flew, narrowly missing Ser Martin's horse. Then a ragged voice called from above, "Go back where you came from. The Westerlands don't serve your Targaryen queen." Brienne spotted a cluster of figures partially hidden among scrubby pines. Perhaps 5 or 6 men, each with a short bow, wearing mismatched leather and cloaks. Rebels or bandits, it mattered little, they clearly intended to harass the Crown's party. Grey Worm barked an order, and half a dozen Unsullied rushed forward, spears lifted. But the men on the ridge were out of immediate reach, at least 40 feet above them. Ser Martin cursed under his breath. "We mean you no harm," he called back, though the statement was belied by the tension in his posture. The rebel voice laughed. "No harm? Then why march on our lands with foreign soldiers and traitorous knights?" Podrick flinched as another arrow zipped past, grazing the edge of a saddlebag. Brienne clenched her jaw. "Listen," she shouted, urging her horse a few steps closer to the slope. "We travel under orders from King Jon Targaryen and Queen Daenerys. We want to speak with your lords, eh?" An arrow thudded into the trunk of the fallen pine, cutting her off. One of the rebels shouted, "We have no king but the rightful heir of House Lannister. Turn around or we'll fill you with arrows." A snarl of frustration rose in Brienne's throat. They were pinned, forced to either retreat or charge up the slope. She locked eyes with Grey Worm, who stood with spear in hand. He gave a nearly imperceptible nod, indicating readiness to attack. But she raised a hand, cautioning him to wait. If they slaughtered these men, they risked fueling the rebels' outrage. "We can't leave the road blocked," she muttered to Ser Martin. "And we're not turning back. Perhaps I can draw them down." Ser Martin frowned. "They have the high ground. We might lose men if we charge blindly." Brienne drew a deep breath. "I'll go up alone. If they kill me, you'll know their intentions." She spurred her mare forward, ignoring Podrick's shocked protest. Within a few strides, the horse's hooves crunched against the debris at the base of the fallen pine. Another arrow flew, but it whizzed overhead, perhaps a warning shot. She lifted her chin, calling to the men on the ridge. "I am Brienne of Tarth. I slew your former queen, Cersei. I don't fear you, but I don't wish to kill you either. Lay down your arms and speak with us or stand aside." For a tense moment, she expected another arrow to bury itself in her chest. Instead, the men murmured among themselves. Then, in a rush of movement, they turned and vanished from view, scrambling back among the pines. She heard them crashing through undergrowth, cursing. The possibility of an ambush further up the slope remained, but it seemed they had fled. Grey Worm gestured for the Unsullied to fan out and secure the area. Cautiously, a couple of them climbed the slope to confirm the attackers were gone. Within minutes, the men returned. "They fled, Captain," one reported in thickly accented common. "No sign of them. They left footprints heading west." Brienne breathed a measure of relief, though her pulse still thundered in her ears. Ser Martin dismounted, gesturing for a few men to cut or drag the fallen pine from the road. It took them the better part of an hour to clear it enough for the horses and supply cart to pass. During that time, Brienne stood watch, scanning the ridgelines with sharpened vigilance. Podrick approached, brow furrowed. "Ser Brienne, that was, well, it was brave, but also..." She finished for him, grimacing. "Reckless." Perhaps. But no one was killed. That's more than I could hope for. He nodded, subdued. I'm just glad they didn't shoot you. She thought of how close it had been. One arrow could have ended her, but she had faced too many battles to tremble now. She placed a hand on Podrick's shoulder. Let's move on. We'll stay on our guard. Once the tree was cleared, they rode onward more slowly. Ser Martin glowered at the path ahead. If that's the welcome we receive from a handful of archers, I dread to think how well-manned the actual holds might be. We might not get off so easily next time. Brienne shared his concern. We'll have to show them the crown's strength, but also that we're not here to slaughter. Let's hope Lady Alderine and her allies see sense. They pressed on, the tension rising like a thick fog among the columns of riders. That night, they made camp in a secluded glen, posting double watches. Brienne insisted that one of them remain awake at all times, herself, Ser Martin, or Grey Worm, while the others took shifts. She slept lightly, her sword within reach, haunted by the sense that more trouble lurked in the craggy wilderness. Sure enough, by the next afternoon, they encountered an even clearer sign of defiance. A small wooden palisade blocked the narrow pass they intended to use, guarded by a handful of armed men wearing rudimentary armor. Unlike the archers, these did not immediately shoot. Instead, one stepped forward, sword in hand, and demanded to know their business. Ser Martin tried a polite approach, stating that they traveled under the crown's authority to speak with Lady Alderine. The men insisted on seeing official seals. Missandei produced them, along with a letter bearing Daenerys' sigil, but the guards only laughed and told them to wait. After half an hour of uneasy stillness, unsullied on one side of the barricade, rebel guards on the other, a messenger arrived from the rebel camp. He was a lanky youth who looked ill at ease in chainmail. He whispered with the guards, then approached Brienne's party. "My lady Sir Knight," he said, eyeing Brienne's armor uncertainly. "You're invited to speak with Lady Alderine Lannister at Emberley, but only if you come unarmed." Grey Worm bristled, stepping forward. "Unarmed? That is not acceptable." The youth swallowed, shifting on his feet. "Lady Alderine says no armed entourage will cross her gates without her consent. If you want an audience, you'll come peacefully. Maybe bring a single guard, but no more." Ser Martin scowled. "She is not in a position to make such demands. We come in the name of the crown. This is outrageous." "Outrageous or not," the youth said, "that's Lady Alderine's decree." Brienne and Missandei exchanged a glance. The Queen's envoy turned to Ser Martin. "We can't simply storm the fortress. It'd be a bloodbath, and that's the opposite of what we want. Perhaps a small group can go inside, prove we're not a threat." Ser Martin's lips pressed into a hard line. "Lady Alderine is cunning. This might be a trap." Brienne was inclined to agree, but Missandei's logic held. If they refused to negotiate, they might never prevent a larger conflict. She exhaled. "I'll go. Let me speak with Alderine. I'll bring Podrick with me, unarmed, if that eases her concern. Or, at most, let me keep my dagger. But I'll leave Oathkeeper behind. She'll know I'm sincere, and maybe she'll at least listen." Grey Worm gave her a troubled stare. "You risk your life again." Brienne nodded. "Yes, but we risk more if we do nothing. This is the chance to stop a war before it starts." Missandei touched Brienne's arm lightly. "I appreciate your willingness. I should come as well as the Queen's envoy." Brienne eyed the slender woman, uncertain. "If it's truly dangerous." Missandei straightened her spine. "I've faced danger before at Daenerys' side. Negotiation is my role. Let me do it." Ser Martin looked torn. "Very well, but at least let Grey Worm position men near the fortress. If something goes wrong, we'll not let them take you captive." The rebel youth listened to their discussion, then cleared his throat. "We'll guide you to Emberley. Bring no more than 3, unarmed." Brienne glanced at Podrick. "You'll stay behind with my sword." "I'm sorry, Pod, but you need to be ready to come if trouble arises." She turned to Missandei. "That leaves you and me to enter. If you wish a single guard, choose one of the Unsullied or perhaps Ser Martin." Missandei hesitated. Ser Martin might be better for negotiations, But he's the crown's official knight. That might be seen as more threatening. The Unsullied rarely speak the common tongue for lengthy negotiations. Perhaps we should go just ourselves. 2 women unarmed. Maybe that will put them at ease. Brienne's heart tightened at the prospect, but Missandei was not wrong. 2 unarmed women might appear less threatening, and trust was a fragile thing right now. "All right," she agreed softly, "but at the first sign of treachery, we'll find a way out." They spent some time removing their weapons and armor. Brienne doffed her plate and mail, keeping only a sturdy leather jerkin and breeches, plus a hidden dagger strapped to her calf. Missandei wore a simple gown beneath her cloak, no blade at all. Grey Worm's disapproval was clear, but Missandei calmed him with a few quiet words in Valyrian, promising that if she saw any IGN of danger, she'd signal for help. With that settled, the rebel youth beckoned them through the palisade. Brienne felt an acute sense of vulnerability without Oathkeeper at her side, but she reminded herself that her physical prowess remained an asset even unarmed. The youth led them along a narrow path that wound up a steep hill through a stand of pine and aspen. 2 more armed men joined them as escorts, eyeing Brienne warily. One, short and stocky, gripped a spear. The other, taller, wore a battered breastplate. Neither spoke. Eventually, the trees parted, revealing Emberley perched on a rocky outcrop. It was a modest fortress, 2 squat towers connected by a low curtain wall with a wooden gate that looked newly reinforced. Beyond the gate, the stone keep rose from within a courtyard. Banners hung from the ramparts, depicting a crude golden lion's head on a crimson field. It was not the official Lannister banner, more like an imitation, presumably for Lady Alderine's pretensions. Brienne's lip curled at the sight. A guard at the gate demanded to see them. One of the escorts barked that these were the crown's envoys, come unarmed. The guard glowered but stepped aside, allowing them into the courtyard. The interior contained a small stable, a few outbuildings, and a scattering of men and women who paused their tasks to stare. Most wore the expressions of people uncertain if they were at the start of a glorious rebellion or a doomed venture. Brienne's shoulders prickled with every gaze. They were led into the keep's main hall, an austere chamber lit by torches and narrow windows. At the far end, atop a dais that might have been carved hastily from local stone, sat a woman in a high-backed chair draped with red cloth. She wore a gown of deep crimson with a fur-trimmed collar despite the warm summer weather. Her dark hair was pulled back into a braided coil, and she appeared to be in her early 30s, her features sharp, her eyes glittering with ambition. 2 guards flanked her, each armed with a poleaxe. Brienne and Missandei approached, halting a few paces away. One of the armed escorts announced them, though he stumbled over the formalities. "My lady, these 2 come from King Jon Targaryen and Queen Daenerys Stormborn, seeking an audience." The woman inclined her head. "I am Lady Alderine Lannet, rightful protector of the Westerlands in the absence of House Lannister's true heirs. Which is to say, I speak for those who refuse to bow to these foreign usurpers." She eyed Missandei. "You must be the Targaryen's mouthpiece." And you, her gaze flicked to Brienne, the famed Brienne of Tarth, traitor to Queen Cersei, slayer of the mother of our rightful king. Brienne kept her face stony. "I did kill Cersei. She was no rightful queen, only a tyrant." Alderine's lips curled in a smile of cold amusement. "How bold. You come unarmed, expecting me to show mercy to the woman who ended House Lannister's rightful line. Tell me, does your Targaryen mistress truly think she can subdue us by sending 2 women to beg at my feet?" Missandei's voice, though soft, carried firmness. "We come to prevent further bloodshed. King Jon and Queen Daenerys offer you clemency if you swear fealty. They do not seek to punish those who once followed Cersei so long as you renounce rebellion now." Alderine leaned forward, her eyes narrowing. "Renounce rebellion? My dear, you stand in the hall of a free Westerlands fortress. We do not belong to Targaryens or wolves. Cersei may be gone, but Lannisters remain in spirit, and I hold the sword of their legacy." Brienne almost laughed at that. Cersei had many supporters who abandoned her the moment she lost power. House Lannister's might is broken, save for what remains under Tyrion or a few scattered loyalists. You have no gold, no large army, no claim to the rock itself. Why cling to a lost cause? A flicker of anger crossed Alderine's face. "Because we remember when the Westerlands were strong, feared by all. We thrived under Tywin Lannister's rule. Cersei made mistakes, yes, but the Targaryen queen destroyed King's Landing and the Northmen butchered thousands. Why should we kneel to them?" Missandei spread her hands, a gesture of appeal. "My queen seeks unity. The city is rebuilding, not destroyed. Lord Tyrion Lannister advises the crown. He, too, seeks peace. You could stand beside him, preserving the Westerlands. Alderine's expression twisted. Tyrion? That twisted dwarf who betrayed his own blood? He's no Lion of the Rock. He's a fool who turned on his family. Her knuckles turned white where they gripped the arms of her chair. Brienne's patience frayed. She stepped forward, ignoring the guards who tensed at her proximity. Listen to reason. If you persist, King Jon will send forces here, unsullied, knights loyal to the crown. Your meager fortress stands no chance. Hundreds of your people will die. Instead of cowering, Alderine laughed, a brittle sound that echoed in the hall. Do you think we stand alone? News may travel slowly, but I've allies beyond these hills. House Crakehall and a band of hedge knights who despise the Targaryens. We gather arms and supplies by the day. Your unsullied can bleed just like any others. Brienne's hand itched for Oak Keeper, but she had left it behind. She took a slow breath, steadying her temper. Missandei interjected, voice still calm. Even combined, you cannot match the crown's might. And it will not just be you who suffers. The small folk in these lands will pay the price of your defiance. A flicker of uncertainty crossed Alderine's face, quickly replaced by haughty defiance. A necessary sacrifice for freedom. But perhaps there's a simpler solution. You want to avoid war? Then surrender yourselves right here. Brienne of Tarth, you in particular must answer for Cersei's death. If you stand trial under our laws, perhaps my allies will relent. The Targaryen queen can keep her throne, just leave the Westerlands to us. Brienne's voice dropped to a cold murmur. That's not going to happen. Alderine's guards shifted. The tension in the hall spiked. Missandei shook her head. You cannot hold us. We came peacefully. And I could keep you, Alderine said, leaning back with a sly smile. Use you as leverage. The Targaryens would pay a high ransom for their precious negotiator and the famed knight who killed Cersei. Brienne's heart hammered. She shifted her stance, ready for a fight despite her lack of a proper weapon. If need be, she would wrest a spear from a guard. But she prayed it wouldn't come to that. If you harm us, you doom yourself, she warned. My companions await outside. They'll storm this fortress. Then let them try, Alderine taunted. Yet she didn't issue the order to seize them. Perhaps she knew a direct conflict could go badly for her. She eyed Brienne, then Missandei. Or do you have another offer? Something that convinces me to yield. Missandei drew herself upright. If you truly believe in the Westerlands' prosperity, we can arrange for additional autonomy. The crown has always allowed each region certain rights. We can ensure the new queen's laws respect local customs, so long as you swear loyalty. House Lannister's name will not vanish, if that is your concern. Tyrion Lannister remains a royal advisor. We can incorporate your house into the new Westerlands Council. Alderine looked unconvinced. A council subordinate to Daenerys and Jon. That's not freedom. No realm is wholly free of a monarchy, Brienne said bluntly. If you want independence, you must defeat the crown in open war. Can you? Or will you subject your people to bloodshed and ruin for a feudal cause? Alderine stared at them, her face warring between pride and pragmatism. I will consider it, she conceded at last, voice tight with reluctance. But do not linger in my lands. Return to your Targaryen masters and tell them that if I yield, I want official recognition as Lady of Emberley, protector of these foothills, with full rights to collect taxes and maintain a local garrison. And I will not kneel before Daenerys in person. My oath will be delivered in writing. Missandei inclined her head. We will relay your terms. I cannot guarantee the crown will accept them all, but they may compromise for peace. Brienne said nothing, studying Alderine. The woman's arrogance grated on her, but it was better than an outright call to battle. We'll go then, she said, stepping back. Alderine's gaze flicked to her guards. See them out. I'll await the Targaryens' reply. No one moved to stop Brienne and Missandei as they turned and followed the escorts back through the keep's corridors. In the courtyard, a few more hostile glances greeted them, but they exited unharmed. Relief warred with frustration in Brienne's mind. This was only a partial victory. Alderine might well be stalling, gathering her forces. But at least they hadn't been taken hostage. They descended the hill path and returned to the crown's envoy. Grey Worm and Ser Martin looked tense, scanning for signs of injury. Podrick rushed forward, relief flooding his face when he saw Brienne unharmed. What happened? He demanded. We saw no violence, but we worried. Brienne recounted the conversation, her voice terse. She claims to speak for the Westerlands' independence under the Lannister banner. She might accept partial submission but demands recognition of her fortress and no public kneeling. It's complicated. Ser Martin let out a slow breath. She's playing a dangerous game, that one. There may be others like her. Missandei nodded. She wants to see if we'll yield to her demands. Or if the crown will. She also threatened to hold us captive, but must have decided it wasn't worth the risk. Podrick frowned. Do we send a raven back to King's Landing, telling them Alderine's terms? That would be wise, Missandei said. Queen Daenerys may decide how much autonomy to grant. We should also visit the other fortresses rumored to be in rebellion, Duskendale Rock, or the smaller Crakehall enclaves. If they're in league with Alderine, we need them at the table. Ser Martin motioned to a soldier who carried a small writing kit. Within minutes, Missandei penned a succinct message detailing Alderine's position. She gave it to the soldier, who would find a raven station in the nearest town. Then the envoy backtracked from Emberley, setting up camp at a defensible site a couple of miles away where they might wait for a reply from King's Landing. Brienne spent the evening on edge, pacing the perimeter of the camp. The hillside rose dark against the twilight sky where Emberley's torches glimmered like distant eyes. She thought of how easily Alderine could rally more men, how quickly the situation might ignite if they misstepped. Missandei's words replayed in her mind, we cannot resort to war if it can be avoided. But what if war was the only language these rebels understood? Podrick found her after sunset. Ser Brienne, he said softly, you should rest. You've been on your feet all day. She turned to him, exhaustion tugging at her features. I will. I fear we're dealing with a fraction of the rebels. There could be bigger hosts out there. Podrick offered a small nod. We'll face them if we must. But we're not alone this time, remember? We have the Unsullied, Ser Martin's knights, and the Crown's support. That did bring a hint of comfort. Brienne placed a hand on Podrick's shoulder. Thank you, Pod. I'm grateful you're here. He smiled, and together they returned to the main area of camp. Grey Worm had assigned sentries in a wide perimeter, the rest of the men prepared to sleep in rows of tents. Missandei stood outside her own tent, conferring with Ser Martin. The night air carried a faint chill, unusual for summer, but perhaps the altitude was to blame. Brienne settled into her tent, listening to the steady hush of the wind among the pines. Tomorrow, they would decide how to proceed, perhaps ride to the next fortress or else wait for a raven from Daenerys. In the back of her mind, she prayed that this fragile attempt at peace would not unravel like so many hopes she had clung to in the past. The next few days brought fresh challenges. A raven returned from King's Landing carrying a missive signed by both Jon and Daenerys. They expressed willingness to grant Lady Alderine a measure of local authority on condition that she publicly acknowledge their sovereignty and allow a small crown garrison at Emberley. They would not demand that she journey to King's Landing in person, but they insisted on her formal oath in the presence of a recognized royal official. Missandei read the missive aloud to the gathered knights and unsullied captains. Brienne studied Ser Martin's reaction. He pursed his lips, half disapproving, but said nothing. At last, Missandei turned to Brienne. We should deliver these terms to Alderine. If she refuses, we'll know her intentions. Ser Martin scratched his beard. She might bristle at the mention of a crown garrison in her fortress. But if she's truly seeking compromise, she'll accept. Otherwise, we may have to prepare for a siege or skirmish. And so they returned to Emberley, albeit with a slightly larger escort this time to underscore the crown's position. They halted outside bow range, sending a single rider to request parley. Alderine emerged onto her battlements, wearing that same crimson gown, her expression guarded. After an exchange of shouts, she agreed to meet them in the clearing halfway up the hill, refusing them entry to the fortress itself. Brienne joined Missandei, Ser Martin, and a half-dozen Unsullied who stood at a respectful distance as bodyguards. Alderine arrived with a handful of her own armed retainers. The two parties faced one another in a small, flat expanse of grass and pine needles. The hush was broken only by the wind sighing through the trees. Missandei held up the scroll. These are the crown's terms. In summary, you keep Emberley recognized as a local lordship. You do not have to swear fealty in King's Landing, but you must pledge loyalty here before an official representative. The Crown will station a small unit, no more than 30 men, within your walls to ensure no further rebellion stirs. Alderine listened with pursed lips. She glanced at Brienne as though suspecting some trick. A Crown garrison. You want my fortress under constant watch? Brienne stepped forward. Merely to ensure you don't harbor illusions of forging a larger rebellion. The Crown has to protect the peace. Alderine's hands tightened at her sides. For a moment, Brienne thought she might refuse outright. But then the woman exhaled sharply. If I accept, I become a mere steward in my own lands. My people might see me as a puppet of the Targaryens. Missandei inclined her head. Better a living steward than a destroyed rebel, my lady. The Crown does not wish to eradicate your house. They simply will not tolerate an independent power base sworn to the Lannister cause. This is the best offer you'll receive. Alderine's gaze flicked between them, then beyond to the row of Unsullied. She knew Brienne thought that open defiance would end in ruin. Still, her pride wrestled with reality. At length, she said in a taut voice, "Very well. I will kneel, metaphorically, to King Jon and Queen Daenerys. Under these conditions, Emberley will remain under my management, but I'll permit a small crown garrison." She paused, glare still present. "And I want it understood that if the crown's men exceed their authority, if they mistreat my people, I will protest to the highest powers." Of course, Missandei agreed, showing no hint of offense. The crown's men are expected to follow the law, not oppress the local folk. Alderine nodded stiffly. "Then let it be done. I'll swear the oath now if you have a proper witness." Ser Martin produced a parchment bearing the crown's seal. "We do. I can witness your vow, as can Ser Brienne, recognized champion of the crown." Alderine's expression soured at hearing Brienne's name coupled with champion, but she did not object. Ser Martin read aloud a brief oath acknowledging King Jon and Queen Daenerys as the rightful monarchs, promising fealty to the Iron Throne and disavowing any attempt to restore an independent Lannister monarchy. Alderine repeated the words through clenched teeth, then signed the parchment with a shaky flourish. Brienne watched closely, searching for hidden malice in Alderine's eyes. The vow was forced, that much was clear, but it was done. They had avoided a fight at Emberley. Even so, a prickle of unease remained. Would Alderine truly honor the oath, or was this merely a temporary ruse while she sought better alliances? When it was finished, Alderine took a step back, dismissing them with a last cold glance. "Send your garrison within the week. We'll have rooms prepared. But do not linger with your entire army." Missandei bowed slightly. "We'll respect your terms." She turned to Brienne and Ser Martin, who each nodded in acknowledgement. Without further exchange, they left the clearing. Back at the envoy's camp, Grey Worm appeared mildly relieved that violence had not erupted. Missandei penned another raven to the crown, informing them of this development. Ser Martin, however, was not satisfied. "We still have Duskendale Rock and Crakehall pockets refusing to yield. They might not be as inclined to compromise." Missandei agreed. "We'll travel there next. Hopefully, Lady Alderine's surrender will encourage them to follow suit. If they see one fortress bending the knee, they might realize the cause is lost." Brienne said little, her mind churning with speculation. Perhaps the swift resolution at Emberley was a good omen, or perhaps it was a fragile truce that could collapse at the faintest spark. She busied herself helping the men pack camp, preparing to journey on. The path to Duskendale Rock proved more rugged. The roads deteriorated, winding through gorges and along steep slopes thick with pine and cedar. They encountered occasional patrols of surly men claiming allegiance to Lord Wavrin, who apparently occupied Duskendale Rock. At one point, a group of Wavrin's men blocked the road, demanding a toll. But upon seeing the size of the crown's envoy, they grudgingly let them pass with only a few muttered insults. The fortress came into view late one day as they rounded a bend, perched atop a jagged rise, its stone walls dark against the sky. If Emberley had looked modest, Duskendale Rock was downright meager, more an overgrown watchtower than a true castle. Yet it commanded a vantage point over the valley, making direct assault dangerous. Brienne guessed it housed no more than 100 fighting men, if that. They halted out of arrow range, surveying the place. Missandei and Ser Martin exchanged glances. "Let us attempt the same approach," Missandei suggested. "Send a messenger to request parley. If they reject us or threaten attack, we'll reconsider." Grey Worm and Brienne concurred. A soldier rode forward, waving a white cloth. After a tense interval, a gate in the wall opened, admitting the soldier. He emerged minutes later bearing a summons for the crown's envoy. Lord Wavrin would hear them in his courtyard under strict conditions that only a small party approach unarmed. That request set off a heated debate. Ser Martin flatly refused to enter the fortress without arms. Missandei tried reasoning that they needed to show good faith. Eventually, Grey Worm proposed a compromise. They would bring sidearms but no lances or heavy gear and would be accompanied by a small guard of Unsullied to remain outside while negotiations took place inside. Lord Wavrin agreed in a second message, albeit reluctantly. Brienne led the group that would speak to Wavrin, Missandei, Ser Martin, and herself, each wearing only a sword belt and light armor. Grey Worm and 10 Unsullied accompanied them to the gate, then remained in the courtyard's outer perimeter. Wavrin's men, perhaps 30 in all, lined the walls, crossbows at the ready. Lord Wavrin proved to be a tall, gaunt man with streaks of gray in his hair, clad in black leather. He awaited them in a small courtyard of cracked flagstones, arms folded. At his side stood a woman wearing a patched cloak, her dark eyes flicking over the visitors with a calculating gaze. More guards crowded the edges of the courtyard, weapons within reach. Ser Martin spoke first. "Lord Wavrin, we come on behalf of the crown. Spare me the formalities," Wavrin said, voice hollow. "I know who you are. We've heard how you forced Lady Alderine to yield at Emberley, stifling the last vestiges of Lannister rule. You come now to do the same to me." Brienne met his eyes evenly. "We come to offer peace. Do you intend to fight a hopeless battle or negotiate?" Wavrin's lips curled in disdain. "Negotiate? With Targaryens and Starks who bled this realm? My family lost everything after the war, our lands, our gold, all seized in the crown's name. I fled here with a handful of loyal men forced to scrape by while the Targaryen queen crows about her victory. Now you want me to bow and say thank you for letting me survive?" Missandei's tone was measured. "We regret the turmoil of war, but the realm is rebuilding. If you swear fealty, King Jon and Queen Daenerys will restore your titles, perhaps even some lost lands, provided you pledge loyalty and cease this defiance." Wavrin gave a harsh bark of laughter. "You think I believe that? That they'll simply give me back my ancestral estate in the Riverlands from which we were cast out? My castle was burned by northern troops." Ser Martin frowned. "Lord Wavrin, the crown is willing to compensate for damages in some cases. But only if you end your rebellion." Wavrin's gaze darkened. "This is no mere rebellion. This is retribution for what was done to us. The Targaryens unleashed dragons. The Northerners marched down and slaughtered peasants in the crossfire. My young son was killed when the battles raged near our lands. Where was your precious mercy then?" A bitter silence followed. Brienne felt a pang of sympathy, recalling how many innocents had perished in the chaos of war. But the blame did not rest solely on the Targaryens. Cersei had set wildfire in King's Landing, unleashing horrors of her own. Sensing the conversation tilting dangerously, she spoke softly, "I'm sorry for your loss. Many families suffered, but continuing this fight will only cause more deaths. Children, wives, the small folk who dwell near your fortress. Do you truly want more widows and orphans?" Wavrin's eyes shimmered with raw pain, quickly masked by anger. The woman at his side, perhaps a lover or trusted captain, laid a hand on his arm, murmuring something. He exhaled, turning away for a moment as if wrestling with himself. Then he faced them again. "Tell me, Ser Brienne, did you enjoy killing Queen Cersei? Did it feel righteous, ending her life in front of the city?" Brienne's jaw tightened. Memories flashed through her mind. Cersei's bitter laugh, the hush of the crowd, the final stroke of Oathkeeper. "I took no pleasure in it," she answered quietly. "But it had to be done. She would have destroyed more lives had she lived." Wavrin stared at her with a mixture of revulsion and grudging respect. "At least you're honest about it. Still, I can't simply forgive everything. Not without a guarantee that my house can recover. Words are wind. How do I know the crown won't discard me once I yield?" Ser Martin retrieved another parchment bearing the crown's seal. "We have official documents granting conditional pardons. If you sign, you'll be recognized as Lord Wavrin of Duskendale Rock, with certain privileges under Westerland's administration. So long as you do not conspire against the throne, your rights stand." Wavrin's face twisted. "And if I refuse? Will you storm this fortress and hang me from the battlements?" Brienne's voice was flat. "If you force a fight, many on both sides will die. The crown does not want that. But yes, if you persist in rebellion, you'll be treated as a traitor. Is that what you want?" The courtyard bristled with tension. The crossbowmen shifted their weight, eyeing gray worms unsullied. For a long moment, Wavrin said nothing, shoulders rigid. His companion whispered again, presumably urging caution. Finally, he let out a shaky breath. "Let me see that pardon." Ser Martin offered the document. Wavrin snatched it, scanning its contents with narrowed eyes. A small crown garrison, forced acceptance of Targaryen rule, but some land restitution in the Riverlands. A chance to rebuild. He lowered the parchment, gaze flicking to Brienne. "Is this truly real, or another lie from a false monarchy?" Brienne met his stare unflinchingly. "King Jon was once named king in the north, but he bent the knee for the good of the realm. He knows what it's like to make hard choices for peace. Queen Daenerys freed slaves in Essos. She values justice. They're not perfect, but they won't punish those who lay down arms in good faith." The gaunt man's shoulders slumped as though the fight drained out of him. "You leave me no choice but to trust your word or die." "Very well. I yield." He spat the last word like a curse. "I'll swear fealty. But mark me, if the crown breaks its promises, we shall rise again." Missandei stepped forward. "You have my queen's vow that we will not. Let us finalize this now." She unrolled a second parchment detailing the oath. Wavrin hesitated, lips pressed in a grim line, then recited it in a voice trembling with suppressed rage. When it came time to sign, he slashed his signature across the parchment and threw the quill aside. Brienne exhaled, releasing tension she hadn't realized she carried. Another fortress pacified, another potential spark of war smothered. Yet seeing the raw grief in Wavrin's eyes, she felt no triumph. Only a weary sense that the entire realm was stitched together by fragile threads of compromise and lingering grudges. That night, they camped near Duskendale Rock, receiving no hospitality from Wavrin's men. Still, the oath was signed and the fortress was effectively under the crown's authority. Missandei penned a new letter to King's Landing detailing their progress. Grey Worm oversaw the partial placement of a small guard, ensuring the fortress wouldn't slip back into rebellion as soon as the envoy left. Brienne found herself sitting by the campfire after sundown, listlessly chewing on dried fruit. Podrick quietly joined her. "You did well," he ventured. "No one died today." She glanced at him. "That's the best outcome we could hope for. But I can't help feeling that these lords, Alderine, Wavrin, resent us so much. They want revenge or independence for wrongs done during the war." She rubbed her temples. "We can't fix everything with a single oath or signature." Podrick placed a tentative hand on her armored forearm. "Maybe not, but it's a start. And if they break their oaths, we'll deal with them again. The crown is stronger now." She managed a faint nod. "You're right. We just have to keep going." She stared at the fire, mind drifting. What are the other pockets of rebellion? What if a truly large army of Lannister loyalists gathered in secret? Perhaps that was an unfounded fear, but after living through so many betrayals, she could not dismiss it. If it came to open war, who knew how many innocent lives would be crushed anew? 3 more days passed in the Westerlands, during which they visited smaller enclaves. Some had already heard of Alderine's and Wavrin's surrenders and were quick to swear fealty, others needed stern warnings before capitulating. In each place, Missandei repeated the same assurance: the crown sought peace, not vengeance. Ser Martin and Grey Worm coordinated the placement of small detachments of loyal soldiers or unsullied, ensuring no rebellious cell would thrive without immediate detection. At last, their mission seemed complete. The war drums in the Westerlands fell silent, replaced by weary acceptance of the Targaryen Stark monarchy. Missandei declared that they should return to King's Landing with the news, leaving behind only the modest garrisons. Brienne felt a swirl of relief and lingering caution. Peace was never truly secure, but for the moment they had averted open conflict. The journey back took nearly a fortnight, slowed by the need to revisit Emberley and Duskendale Rock one last time, ensuring compliance. Lady Alderine, sullen but abiding her vow, tolerated a handful of crown soldiers in her fortress. Lord Wavrin, just as bitter, grudgingly parted with a dozen rooms for the unsullied. Neither host offered smiles, but neither brandished swords. In the end, that was enough. One crisp morning, the envoy descended from the western hills onto the smoother roads leading east. The tension lifted from their group like a shroud. Podrick chatted more freely, while some of the unsullied allowed themselves faint smiles at the thought of returning to King's Landing. Grey Worm, though stoic as ever, no longer kept his spear constantly at hand. Missandei rode beside Brienne, occasionally pointing out a scenic view or sharing a memory of traveling with Daenerys in Essos. As for Brienne, she found her mind drifting to Tarth, the father she had left behind, and the simpler duties awaiting her there. She had come to the Westerlands to prevent a resurgence of Lannister might. Though not wholly extinguished, it was contained. She prayed that the realm would have a chance to heal. They crested a hill on the final day, and King's Landing spread before them in the hazy distance. The walls, the towers, the glint of sun on the Blackwater Bay. A familiar sight, home to so much strife and triumph. As they rode through the city gate, merchants and commoners parted, gazing at the returning envoy with curiosity. Their presence lacked the fanfare of a victorious army, for no great battle had been fought. But Brienne felt a quiet satisfaction, remembering all too well how such tasks often ended in carnage. They dismounted in the Red Keep's courtyard amid soft murmurs of greetings from the Gold Cloaks. Servants hurried to assist, stable hands took the horses, and a steward approached, bowing. "Welcome back, Ser Martin, Missandei, Ser Brienne. The king and queen await your report in the throne room." Despite the ache of travel, they proceeded at once. Grey Worm marched behind them, leading the unsullied in solemn formation. Inside the Red Keep, courtiers whispered and parted. Before the massive doors of the throne room, they paused. Jon and Daenerys had apparently convened a gathering. A half-circle of onlookers ringed the dais, which was lit by golden afternoon rays streaming through high windows. Jon stood near the Iron Throne, wearing dark leathers. Daenerys was beside him in a gown of pale silver, the triple-headed dragon pinned at her shoulder. Lord Tyrion Lannister was present as well, though he stood a bit behind, arms folded, a pensive look on his face. Alongside him, Ser Davos Seaworth observed with quiet interest. "Your Graces," Missandei said with a respectful dip of her head. "We have returned from the Westerlands. Lady Aldarine Lannet and Lord Ern Wavrin, along with several smaller enclaves, have sworn fealty to you. We placed modest garrisons to ensure compliance. There was no major battle. All yields were achieved through negotiation." A ripple of relief passed through the assembled lords and ladies. Jon's shoulders visibly loosened. "That is most welcome news. Well done." Daenerys's eyes gleamed with approval as she regarded Missandei, Grey Worm, Ser Martin, and finally Brienne. "We knew we chose our envoys well. You have our thanks." Tyrion stepped forward, a faint smile curving his lips. "It seems my extended family's stubborn supporters have accepted reality. I doubt that pleases them, but it pleases the realm. Well done, all of you." Jon turned his gaze to Brienne. "Ser Brienne, once again, your involvement was crucial. Missandei's letters spoke of your bravery and restraint in dealing with those who wanted your blood for killing Cersei." Brienne bowed. "I only did what was necessary to keep the peace. Missandei deserves the credit for the negotiations." Daenerys shook her head gently. "It seems you both played vital roles. We are grateful." She exchanged a glance with Jon, who inclined his head. She then addressed the hall. "We hereby proclaim that the Westerlands is secure under the crown. Let all know that rebellion against King Jon and Queen Daenerys shall not be tolerated, yet mercy is offered to those who lay down arms." A smattering of applause rose from the assembled. Brienne felt a complex tangle of emotions: relief, pride, lingering sorrow for those who had lost so much in the war. This was the best outcome possible. Perhaps now she could finally return home to Tarth. After the formalities, Jon and Daenerys stepped down from the dais, leading Brienne and the others to a side chamber for a more private discussion. The thick wooden door closed behind them, leaving only Tyrion, Ser Davos, Missandei, Grey Worm, and a handful of trusted guards. Daenerys exhaled, letting the regal mask slip a bit. "I'm glad we avoided more bloodshed," she said softly. "The realm has suffered enough." Jon nodded. "I agree. The people need a chance to rebuild without fresh wars." "Thank you again, Ser Brienne." Grey Worm spoke quietly. It was Missandei's negotiations and Ser Brienne's presence that convinced the rebels. Daenerys's warm smile flickered over them. "I'll not forget it. I realize that once again we call upon your service, Ser Brienne, even though you hold no official title at this court. If there's anything you desire, land, gold, or a position, we would happily grant it." Brienne drew a steady breath. She recalled Lady Ellery Tarley's earlier offer to join the Kingsguard and how she had refused. She thought of her father waiting on Tarth and her vow to protect the innocent wherever she could. She glanced at Podrick, who stood nearby, brow raised in silent question. Then she looked Daenerys in the eye. "I'm honored, your grace, but I desire no payment, only that you continue to rule with justice. If you need me again, you may call on me. For now, I should return to Tarth. My father grows older, and I've neglected my duties there too long." Daenerys nodded in understanding. "Very well. The realm owes you a debt, but if this is your wish, so be it. I'll have a royal vessel take you to Tarth if you'd like. It's safer than roads filled with brigands." Brienne allowed a small smile, touched by the offer. "Thank you. That would be most helpful." Jon offered a firm handshake. "You have our gratitude, Ser Brienne. Whenever you wish to come to court again, the gates of the Red Keep will stand open." She bowed, a mixture of relief and finality coursing through her. Tyrion stepped forward, his mismatched eyes thoughtful. "When next I see my sister's old supporters, I'll remember how you handled them. Peaceful persuasion. I never thought I'd see the day. You're a better diplomat than you know." Brienne merely nodded, unsure how to respond to a compliment from Tyrion Lannister about dealing with Cersei's loyalists. Ser Davos, standing by, gave a nod of respect. "Safe journey home, Ser Brienne. The realm needs more like you." Within the hour, arrangements were made. Brienne and Podrick gathered their few belongings from their assigned quarters, said polite farewells to Ser Martin and Missandei, and made their way down to the docks on the Blackwater Bay. The day was bright, gulls wheeling overhead as a royal galley awaited them, its sails emblazoned with the Targaryen dragon. Sailors scurried to prepare for departure. Brienne paused on the quay, gazing once more at King's Landing's skyline. Once she had dreaded returning to the city. Now she departed with a sense of accomplishment. Perhaps at last she had helped close the door on the Lannister threat. Podrick's face shone with anticipation. "It'll be good to see Tarth again," he said, half to himself. "I wonder if your father will be proud of all you've done." Brienne allowed a quiet chuckle. "He might be tired of hearing the realm drag me away, but I hope he's well." They boarded the ship. The captain, a broad-shouldered man with a neatly trimmed beard, bowed respectfully to Brienne, acknowledging she traveled on royal request. Soon, the sails caught the wind and the galley glided from the docks, passing under the watchful gaze of the city's walls. The familiar tang of salt air filled Brienne's nostrils, stirring memories of Tartha's sapphire waters. She stood on the deck, letting the wind ripple through her cropped hair. Podrick leaned on the railing, soaking in the vista. Hours slipped by, the coastline receding behind them. The sea glimmered under a late summer sun, calm enough to promise a smooth voyage. Brienne's thoughts drifted to the future. Would the Westerlands remain peaceful? Would rebellious lords nurse their grudges in secret, waiting for a moment of weakness? Possibly. But for now, the realm was granted respite, and she had done her part. After a day and a half at sea, Tartha's outline appeared on the horizon. Podrick grinned, pointing at the landmass with boyish excitement. As they drew nearer, the waters around the isle shone with that unmistakable sapphire hue, vivid enough to take one's breath away. Brienne's heart lifted. Here lay her true home, the place that had shaped her into a knight who refused to abandon her code no matter how the world mocked her. The galley anchored in the harbor below Evenfall Hall. Brienne spied the familiar shape of the castle walls perched above the shore. A cluster of Tarth guards and sailors awaited them on the docks. She disembarked, breathing in the bracing sea breeze. Podrick followed, scanning for recognizable faces. Sure enough, a grizzled guard stepped forward, smiling at the sight of them. "Sir Brienne," he said, bowing low. "Your father is eager for your return. He's asked that we bring you up to the hall at once." Brienne's chest constricted with a warm ache of relief and longing. "Then let's not keep him waiting." They rode the short path from the harbor to Evenfall Hall, the same route she had taken when she last returned from King's Landing. Familiar scenery greeted them, rolling green hills, a scattering of wildflowers, and the gleaming shoreline stretching to either side. Villagers paused their chores to wave, murmuring in awe that Lady Brienne had come back once more. She acknowledged them with respectful nods. At the castle gate, the portcullis was raised and the courtyard was abuzz with excitement. Lord Selwyn Tarth emerged from within, leaning on his cane. He looked older still, but his face brightened the moment he saw her. Brienne dismounted, heart pounding, and rushed to his side. "Father," she murmured, embracing him gently. He pressed a hand to her cheek, tears glistening in his eyes. "My child," he whispered, voice cracking. "You've come home again. Thank the seven." She smiled through her own threatening tears. "I'm sorry it took so long. The realm needed me once more." He nodded, stepping back to look her over. "And you answered the call, as always. Are you well? No fresh wounds?" She managed a wry grin. "Only a few bruises and scrapes. Nothing serious. The negotiations went better than we feared." Podrick dipped his head politely and Lord Selwyn greeted him with warmth. "Young Podrick. Keeping my daughter safe, I hope?" Podrick blushed faintly. "She does more of the saving than I do, my lord. But I do my best." Lord Selwyn nodded in approval, then guided them inside. The hall smelled of roasted fish and fresh bread, a comforting aroma. Servants bustled about, setting a table for an impromptu meal. Brienne helped her father to a seat, noticing how stiff his movements had become. Age was taking its toll. She silently vowed to spend more time here, assisting him with the castle's administration and protecting Tartha's people rather than chasing conflict across the realm. During the meal, Lord Selwyn asked Brienne about her journey in detail. She recounted the gist of it: Cersei's lingering loyalists, Alderine Lannister, Ern Wavrin, the negotiations, and the final oath-taking that secured the crown's authority. Lord Selwyn shook his head. "It's a wonder you accomplished so much without another war. The realm is fortunate you were there." Brienne shrugged, humbled. "I did what anyone would do. Missandei's words did most of the work." "Nonsense," Selwyn said. "Few knights could face rebel lords unarmed and convince them to yield. You have a gift, though I know it weighs on you." She sipped her watered wine, reflecting on the truth of his words. Yes, it weighed on her, the responsibility, the constant uncertainty whether she might be needed again. But for now she was here, at Evenfall Hall, free to lay down her sword for a time. When dusk deepened, she excused herself to her old chambers. The room remained much as she had left it, though fresh linens had been placed on the bed and the shutters were open to the mild sea breeze. She set Oakkeeper in its accustomed stand by the wall, a place of honor in the quiet gloom. Stepping to the window, she gazed at the moonlit bay where gentle waves glimmered like scattered pearls. A sense of peace filled her. Though she was ever ready to defend the realm from new threats, for tonight at least, she could rest. The conflicts in the Westerlands were defused, Cersei's shadow no longer loomed, and King's Landing had found a measure of stability under Daenerys and Jon. Brienne took a slow breath, inhaling the salt air. She thought of how far she had come from a mocked girl at her father's keep to a knight who had slain a queen and negotiated peace among warring lords. The road had been littered with heartbreak and danger, yet she had never abandoned her code. She whispered a soft prayer to the seven, thanking them for guiding her steps, for giving her the chance to preserve life instead of ending it. Then she crossed the room to her bed, pulling off her boots and leathers with a weary sigh. Tomorrow, she would greet the dawn not as a wandering champion, but as Lady Brienne of Tarth, guardian of her father's lands, caretaker of a small corner of a vast kingdom. That was enough. Should the realm call on her again, she would answer, but until then, she would embrace the simplicity of home. She lay down, listening to the muffled crash of distant surf. Her mind drifted over memories of battles and trials, fierce arguments and tenuous treaties. Gradually, the tension eased from her body, replaced by a gentle warmth. In her final thought before sleep claimed her, she imagined the wide horizon of sapphire waters at dawn, a testament to life's quiet resilience. No matter how dark the storms of war raged, a new day would always break, offering hope. And so she slept, content in the knowledge that she had done her duty and could, for a time, rest in the light of peace.